Welcome into the 2023 North Carolina Signing Day class special, December 21st, 2022. Don Callahan, right there.
Yep,
Ladies and gentlemen, Don
that's
Callahan,
right.
live from the Man Tower.
Clean socks, clean underwear.
I am, of course, Tommy Ashley. Greg Barnes will be joining us.
Because Craig's always late.
Greg is the guy that you wait on. And so he will join us here in the middle. Don, this is a day you've worked for quite a while, right?
Yeah. Particularly the last couple of weeks, but yeah, this is at least a full year coming. You know, we'll be working on the next class starting pretty soon. So yeah, been working on this a bunch and obviously following these kids a long time. So it's I guess it's a formality basically nowadays because a lot of these kids have been committed since the summer, but it's the final step for those guys.
Yeah. So, what's it been like? Obviously, with 2020 in the middle of COVID, 2021, there were a lot of COVID kids. 2022 is still a little bit affected by that. But what's it been like for you actually being able to get back out on the trail for the past, however many months covering these guys in person where Zoom sort of took over the world there for a while?
Yeah, so I'm a type of reporter that I like to go on location to spend time with the recruit and their high school coach. In-state guys, they know for the most part, there are a few exceptions, but very, very few of them. For an in-state guy, I like for my first interview to be with them in person and to kind of explain what I do so they understand just who I am, that sort of thing. Because, you're a high school kid going through this process. I can understand this being a little weird having a grown man ask you a bunch of questions. And I always think it's good later on in the process to be able to put a face with a phone call. Because obviously later on after a visit, I'm getting up with those guys on their cell phones. But yeah, it's been so big for me. During COVID, we did have some 7-on-7s that popped up and some camps that I was able to rely on to see some of these guys in person. But there were a lot of players who did not take advantage of those opportunities. So this has been nice the past, I don't know, I guess it's been at least a year now to actually be in person with those guys and to meet with them and to see them multiple times.
All right. So, that's probably going to be um, Greg Barnes at your front
Yeah,
door
I'm thinking.
waiting to come in.
No, that was actually my kids leaving for school.
You have to, Greg will have to navigate the stairwell. If you want to run get him, I'll sort of go over what we're going to do. But don't leave me long.
I don't think he's here yet.
He texted me and he said he's here.
Is he? All right, then I'll run down there.
All right. So, folks, what we're going to do today is we're going to go through each individual player as their letters of intent come in, sort of discuss what they bring to the table, their fit, their high school career, Don's experience recruiting them, and then we'll go through. Greg will add the perspective of what they bring to the team and what they could possibly bring to the team. Obviously, Mr. Barnes is joining us from behind. Greg, are you retired or am I the retired one? I'm the retired one.
Remember, they probably won't catch what he says.
Yeah, well, hey, it's Greg.
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll do that as the things come in. Shout out to the folks that are in here joining us live already. It's going to be a fun day, a fun 3 hours, a lot to talk about. Transfer portal action, recruiting class. One thing I want to discuss with one of our guests that'll come on if we can get them on here later is how the portal has sort of changed high school recruiting and sort of made it an interesting dynamic there. Matt Bunn in the chat, is this Don's Man Tower? Yes, this is Don's Man Tower. We are not on the couch. We are across. He's got 3 big screen TVs. We've got 4 monitors here. So we've got the whole thing about to blow up. The Inside Carolina banner that's on the thing. Don had an instruction yesterday to get a white tablecloth to cover the rest of the table.
I failed.
And he managed not to do it. Let me bring Greg in here. And Greg, we have 2 microphones for 3 people, so we'll make it work. But this has been an interesting few weeks for North Carolina football with coaching changes, with getting ready for a bowl game, which almost seems forgotten. And now here we are on signing day. Mack Brown's 4th full class I guess, but probably would we agree that it's the least exciting class thus far? Don, is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you look at the prior three full classes, they all were top 15 classes. This one, to be honest, would be lucky to finish in the top 25. I think I checked last night; it was number 25 exactly. There's the potential to add one more player to this class. Jordan Lewis is announcing at 10 a.m., which we're going to, I guess, stay on the air for, right?
Yep.
And so that obviously will help boost the class a little bit. But the problem is, you have a lot of teams behind North Carolina that will be adding to their class also, and very likely will surpass UNC, knock it out of the top 25. So yeah, so this is definitely a drop to what Mac has been able to do the prior three classes.
So let's get Greg in here. Greg, sort of your thoughts, not just on the recruiting class, but on the last 3 weeks or last month from North Carolina, basically since the Wake Forest game. It seems like the tenor around the program has changed a little bit. Um, Mac pushed the ACC championship game as the thing that didn't really go, and then Longo leaves. Just an interesting time around North Carolina.
Yeah, and we can dive into this more with Don about kind of the quality of this class. But I think what Don will tell you, and if you followed recruiting for long, this is kind of status quo. Is recruiting is really an 18 to 24-month cycle, and so North Carolina's success or lack thereof, depending on how you're looking at it, with this particular class, really stems from the losing record North Carolina had in 2021. When you go 6-7, the momentum that you had coming off of an Orange Bowl appearance really drops, and that makes it a little bit challenging. That's the importance of winning, and so when people start thinking about the Coastal Division title, that's really not going to pay dividends until next year. And of course, North Carolina hopes they can build off of that. Uh, it wasn't that long ago, Tommy. What, 5, 6 years ago, I guess, that we did not have a early signing day. We had to wait to that first Wednesday in February for things to get exciting. And what that allowed you to do back then is you could get to the end of the season, and then you would have a couple weeks of the coaching carousel, which is always chaotic, and that was pretty much it. And then you'd go into bowl prep, you go into the dead period, you come out of the dead period, first week of January, and then you would have these big official visit weekends leading up to signing day. Uh, and so there was like a distinct schedule for the 2 months after the regular season finale. That is no more. I mean, that is a thing of the past. And so what you have now is uh, the early signing period has ultimately become the signing day. It's no longer waiting to the national signing day, that first Wednesday in February. This is the big deal. And I don't think that coaches really expected that to transpire the way it did.
Mhm.
I,
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree that
Yes.
coaches thought you could get some guys locked in who had already committed?
Hmm.
But what?
Well, Mac talks about that all the time because he was part of that decision process. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm being picked up. And that basically the intention was guys who were committed a long time, and had no interest in visiting anywhere else, and then guys who were enrolling early. That was the intention, and now it's come to, well, really immediately it came to the point where schools viewed it as the signing day, and anybody who wasn't going to sign then was basically considered a decommitment because they knew that once they went into January, that kid was going to officially visit other schools, and then all bets are off of what ends up happening. So I mean, what you're saying is exactly true, and Mac touched on that a little bit in the press conference.
What are we looking at in terms of the percentage of kids who are signing today? I mean, are we talking like 80%? Are we talking 90%?
We're talking a really high percent. I don't know if I could put a number on it, but
Yeah.
we're probably talking, especially now with I think in the past couple of classes, we were talking somewhere between 80 and 90%. But I think with the transfer portal, we're talking over 90% because now schools are like basically like, let's just focus on the transfer portal stuff. I mean, there'll be additions, high school additions, and there are some guys who won't sign today. But the number is going to be so much smaller than what it was before. before this season when the transfer portal became such a force.
Yeah, so Tommy, in terms of the schedule, I mean, this is just wild, and this part of this is because North Carolina had a successful season. They won the Coastal, so they got to play in the ACC championship game. But they come out of the Thanksgiving weekend, and they have a standard game week preparing for the ACC championship game. So on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the 28th, 29th, 30th, and then the 1st, it's all game prep for Clemson. December 2nd, travel to Charlotte. December 3rd, it's a night game in Charlotte. They play Clemson, they lose. And then you get home early morning on Sunday, the 4th. Well, 2 days later, Phil Longo and Jack McNeil let Mack know that they're leaving. The day before, Monday, December 5th, the transfer portal opens. So you're talking about that was 15 days ago. So not only are you just coming off of a ACC championship game appearance, you lose your offensive coordinator and your offensive line coach. The transfer portal opens. North Carolina ended up with 12 guys that jumped into the portal.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's roughly 1,200 kids who are already in the portal. North Carolina's going to have approximately 19, 20 guys signed today.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a ton to have to deal with in a very short period of time. So it went from not being that chaotic whatsoever to being just a mess. And I don't know that there's anything you can do other than moving signing day to address it.
Yeah, one thing Mack talked about on Monday at his press conference is that, is the hecticness of going on. You've got coaches out, you got players out, you got transfers trying to come in, you're having all these recruiting visits. It is madness. I mean, Sudus at Carolina, I can't imagine what his month has been like.
Yeah.
I mean, it's constantly going, but the last month, I mean, it's got to be absolutely insane for him to manage it all. You got Day Hollins jumps in the portal
And then jumps out.
and then immediately jumps out when he sees 5 of his other roommates, DB roommates, get in, and he says, well, maybe I like it. And Mack says, by all means, come back. One thing that I thought, and this was the funniest comment from Mack's press conference on Monday, and we'll get into the signing day and the portal talk as we go along, but Mack flat out said, you date, I date. And when somebody asks, can players come back? And a lot of talk on the Inside Carolina message boards about guys going in the portal and then perhaps coming back at some later date. And Mack made that reference about the dating game. But he also said if a guy stayed, did not miss a meeting, did not miss a practice, was available for everything, all the lifts, then he could certainly play in the bowl game and then explore whatever. I'm not sure I agree with letting somebody enter the portal and then play because you're taking.
I was going to ask you guys that. I mean, what are your feelings on a guy who basically, because it was kind of weird. Now this is the opposite angle of it, but I talked to Willie Lampkin, who is committed to transfer to North Carolina. He's playing for Coastal. It was funny because we had to schedule an interview in between his bowl practice with a completely different team and other obligations for his team. It just felt weird to me. Now, it's kind of cool for UNC fans because they're going to be able to watch him play and see what he brings to the table before he actually arrives in North Carolina. But what are your guys' thoughts on these guys? I mean, they're not on the team, but they're playing for Carolina essentially.
I don't like it. I mean, maybe I'm old school. And after listening to Randy Clements on Monday saying, do they really love it?
Yeah.
Talking about players, I understand taking care of the guys. And Greg, you can expound on this a little bit. I understand Mack's point about taking care and being a player's coach and looking after them. But I mean, if you're transferring and you're leaving, that means somebody else in that spot's going to have to play next year.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about how important bowl practices are, right? The games aren't that important, but the practices and all that leading up to it are a big deal. I just think, I don't like it. And maybe I'm just the old guy.
I think there's 2 parts to it. I think we've clarified that, yeah. Don, right? I think there's 2 parts to it. Number one, I think before the portal, I think you had situations where there were kids who knew they were going to transfer, and depending on the type of relationship they had with the staff, uh, they would let the staff know. I mean, Max talked a lot about how because of the portal, they've had to have uh, kind of more upfront discussions with guys. Typically, that occurs during the bye week. But those conversations were taking place to some degree even before the portal. And so, even though we may not have known that, hey, this guy is definitely leaving, I think in some situations the coaching staff had a pretty good idea, and they didn't necessarily just say, "Hey, you're done. You got to quit the team." Mac makes a good point in terms of, look, I mean, this whole deal is supposed to be for the kids. Um, and if you're going to talk that game, you're going to talk about a 40-year decision, and you want to differentiate yourself from some of these other programs that try to run strictly as a pro team, then you've got to do some things that maybe don't make sense, but that are beneficial to the players. And I think that's what you're seeing is, and I think Max is exactly right. Look, if you're going to come to team meetings, if you're going to be accountable, if you're going to be responsible and do exactly what we ask you to do and give it your all, I mean, you've been a part of this team, you're still a part of this program. Let's see it through. Now, the other part of it is, I would be shocked if any of these guys play for the reason that you mentioned. I see no benefit whatsoever in allowing these guys to actually play in the game, knowing they're not going to be back next year and knowing that you've got guys that need reps. But that's different than letting them practice and letting them participate. And what that also does is that generates goodwill, because the guys know, hey, I entered the portal, but they're letting me hang around. And so whenever they go to another school or they talk to their buddies that are still in high school or their high school coaches, there's a good feeling there left by what North Carolina did. Now, I think that's part of the recruiting game, but that's also part of doing what you're talking about, which is you're taking care of the kids and giving them the best opportunities to succeed. Because sometimes you there's just not a good fit. You like it, you like the coaches, you like the place, you think you can play more elsewhere. Uh, Coaches leave all the time, and so I think from that standpoint, I don't really have an issue with it. But as I said, if you let them play in the game, at that point, you're like, wait a minute, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean,
I
it's
have a follow-up.
Don. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I had a follow up for you guys. How much of this has to do with the fact of, if you don't let these transfer portal guys play for you, you will be you won't have enough bodies for the game, because they did pass that rule about red shirts not, or the bowl games this season don't count towards the red shirt, 4 game thing, which obviously was teams worried about not having enough bodies, maybe not necessarily guys to play, but just in case there were injuries and that sort of thing. So how much of this do you think is because, hey, if we lose a couple guys to injury, then we can be in a really tough situation?
I think that's part of it for some teams. I do like the fact that they made it so it doesn't count against your red shirt, but it only affects one player for North Carolina, right? Andre Green
Yeah,
Jr.
Andre Green. Yeah.
And so, in that regard, I just why the NCAA does things, I can't figure it out. I mean, and this is a conversation for later, but
How much time we got, Tommy, to
yeah,
talk
I
about
mean,
NCAA?
it's the sun's coming up right here in front of us. I mean, we probably could do it till the sun goes down, but I mean, it's just there are a lot of rules that are made that seemingly are for a greater good, but don't seem to fit together, and especially not in the order they come in.
Yeah, it's just always every rule that's made. There's always unexpected consequences that end up being more of a factor.
It's typically retroactive with NCAA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of them having some great plan in place, they're trying to piece it together after the fact.
Yeah, it's sort of like when we were planning this radio show. We had 2 mics, and we said we got it, and then the goat says, "Let me join," and we like, we'll make it work, but we don't have an extra mic. So next time we'll have like 6 mics, and maybe somebody in the chat can come hang out with us. Reset a little bit.
We do have a funny request.
Okay, so no, I'm not going to that request. I saw it.
I just want to throw it out there. We're not going to do it, although it's a great idea. Preston from Greensboro wants us to prank call Ross Martin. I don't think we have time for that in the show.
Ross said that he had PT this morning. He's covering the press conference at noon, and they're going to Michigan, or going to Charlotte to cover the Michigan game. So got a lot on his plate. rehabbing from the pec issues. I've never torn a pec. I guess
No.
it has something to do with I've never really lifted weights. So at any rate, resetting a little bit. Inside Carolina's Live signing day spectacular 2023 recruiting class. Go ahead, Greg.
No,
You're
I was just going to
smiling.
make the comment that that Ross is lifting too heavy weights, and if you know Ross Martin, Ross will be the first to tell you that guys with long arms really have a hard time with the bench press.
That's the excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I used to hear that at the NFL Combine. It was like he's got a long wingspan. He's not going to be able to do as many reps. Anyway, Don, we are now at 7:21.
7:21.
Any letters of intent dropped yet? You're making people nervous having to wait. And
Yeah, I mean, we have it up. Actually, no, we do have a couple. We have at least one. RJ Grigsby. Did you throw it up there?
I can't throw it up on the screen.
We got so involved in our conversation.
Oh yes, Grigsby. Let me find it. Hold, please. There you go. Just in, Robert Grigsby, North Cobb High School offensive lineman. Uh, this is a relevant question when we're talking about offensive line recruits. You have a new offensive line coach at North Carolina. Thoughts and opinions and philosophies may be different. When you talk to these recruits, Grigsby, you know, specifically or not, what is the mindset there when you are committed to a school, they change a coach, your position coach that late in the game?
So it's really, I know people hate when I answer it like this, but it's the case is that it's a case by case situation, and I think that North Carolina's 3 offensive line commitments, one now assignee, they they committed to North Carolina for way more than the offensive line coach. I mean, I think, I mean, DJ Gaff is one of the offensive linemen. He's a UNC legacy, so it wasn't going to matter who's the offensive line coach. Grigsby, I think, always liked North Carolina, liked the academics, and so obviously you want to like the offensive line coach, but I think it wasn't as big of a factor for him per se. It was more about the school for him.
We've had this conversation. It feels like for 20 years. It's probably been taking place longer than that. Uh, Understand like defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator that matters a lot because that's the person running the scheme that you're in and those types of things. Do individual assistant coaches make enough of a difference like at this time of year for a kid to say, whoa, wait a minute, I know who that guy is, I don't want to go play there, and that they'll make a switch?
I think there are certain kids and certain relationships that, yes, it matters because the relationship is what kind of won out in the recruitment. Obviously, making a decision on, especially in this day and age, on a relationship with an assistant coach or with your position coach is a very bad decision because even if they don't leave during your recruitment, the odds of your position coach leaving at some point during your career are very, very high. I think the average tenure for an assistant coach is like 2 or 3 years. So you're going to probably have at least 2 position coaches during your time. But yes, there are certain recruits who one of the primary reasons that they committed to a school was because of their relationship with a position coach, and that ends up hurting them. The vast majority, though, I will say there are other factors, and those factors end up keeping those kids committed.
What is the consequence or byproduct of the transfer portal here? This may not be the right way to phrase this, but does it make it easier for kids making decisions? I don't know if you've had these conversations with high school coaches, knowing that, hey, if I go here and I don't like it, I can just get in the portal and leave and go somewhere else. I don't have to stay out a year. Whereas 5 years ago, like, especially like in the ACC, if I go to Carolina and I ultimately want to go to NC State, well, I've probably got to sit out 2 years.
Yeah, I just don't think kids look at it that way. One, because we're dealing with high school kids and they don't worry about what they're doing tomorrow, let alone what they're doing, in a couple of years. But I think also it's almost, I mean, it's kind of equivalent to just a regular student. I mean, you don't if you are down to 2 schools, you don't say, I'm just going to flip a coin and go to this school because if I don't like it after the first semester, I'm going to transfer over there. Especially if you told your parents that, they'd probably, have some choice words for you. So I don't think that's in their minds, but I think it does. Maybe I could see, and this is just me kind of just speculating and just trying to be a sociologist here, but if you look at some of these, like particularly the quarterback position, some of these quarterbacks who have been in the portal 2 or 3 times now, and they've got to have that approach. It feels like, especially after transferring after just the season, they transfer another. It's kind of odd, but I don't think the high school kids. I've never got that sense from the high school kids.
JT Daniels
Yeah,
is going to Rice. That's his 4th college stop.
yeah, that's ridiculous. So clearly, he probably is the exception that takes that approach where it's like, I'll try right. Well, I guess he's out of.
Gotta
be. Yeah. So
this Oregon kid.
I was gonna say, in their Oregon kid was like his 9th year.
Yeah,
or
I saw
something.
that. That was insane.
It's getting out of hand. But
Yeah.
look, a lot of people say, well, why would you want to stay in college that long? I would say that I'd still be in college if they'd let me.
We have another
Breaking news, break it.
All right, we have Tyler Thompson, not too far from here, actually. You got well, actually, pretty close to where Greg lives. He's from Panther Creek High School, and I think that technically Cary right now. Okay. Long basketball player turned edge rusher, just got his letter of intent in.
I've heard you mention him as a guy that can help for North Carolina. Just sort of speak to why you believe he might be able to contribute. I mean, we have to couch all these high school guys, and now you add the portal that high school guys may not contribute as fast as people want them to. But you've mentioned Tyler Thompson in previous podcasts with Ross about he could make some noise early.
Yeah, I think, well, maybe not necessarily early, because I think he's a guy I know he's a guy who primarily focused on basketball for much of his life and really didn't make football a priority until maybe a little over a year ago. And what we have seen from that is he had a fabulous senior season, put up great numbers, and the guys at 24/7 Sports took notice and bumped up his ranking. So I think he has, I mean, he's like a lot of those basketball players turned edge rushers, is if they can adjust to the physicality of football, learn how to use their raw explosiveness, their length to their advantage. The ceiling is the roof for those guys.
Don, you've scouted guys for a long time. Mack has talked for a long time, for 4 years, about generating a pass rush. And what every defensive coordinator wants to do, it doesn't matter if you're Gene Chizik or Jay Bateman or Everett Withers or Chuck Pagano, you want to be able to generate pressure with your front 4 guys. When you look at somebody like Tyler Thompson and you see him in person, kind of what are you looking at in evaluation to say, okay, I think this guy translates to the next level as somebody who can generate a pass rush?
So when you're looking at the explosiveness, his first step, how he comes off the ball, obviously most, if not all, of the offensive linemen they're going up against are not going to be playing college football. So you want to see someone who's basically firing off his stance before that offensive lineman has a chance to kind of get set, and then be able to run the arc, as they say, dip the shoulder, that sort of thing. But also, if you do get caught, be able to use your length, be able to have a couple of pass rush moves. And that's one of the things that kind of comes later with some of these guys. But usually they have at least one go-to, maybe like a counter sort of pass rush move. But you really just want to see the size, the length, just the athleticism, the explosiveness, with the idea that whatever coach he goes to is going to be able to teach him the pass rush moves, to teach him the mindset, to teach him just the approach and those sort of things.
Are there many kids that have like a handful of pass rush moves at that level, or is that just kind of dependent upon what program they're in, if that program is notable in terms of the success that they've had?
Yeah, I think it depends on just the level. what I mean by that, like if you're in Atlanta, if you're in Charlotte, and you can just focus on just that position as opposed to having to play on multiple positions for that high school, and you have access to individual trainers, which are all over the place in places like Charlotte and Atlanta, you're going to be a lot more advanced than some other guys. Typically, though, what you get is even even a solid pass rusher on the high school level, they probably just have that one move that they love, and maybe another move that they kind of throw in there. Um, and usually they don't advance to having multiple moves until they get to college. But there are definitely some exceptions. I remember Tamon Fox, but he was his dad was a trainer. He trained defensive linemen in that area. Tamon Fox came out with a bunch of different pass rush moves, and it allowed him to play pretty early in his UNC career and to be a pretty reliable pass rusher for UNC.
Let me ask you this, Don. We talk about level of competition. There's clearly been many highly rated recruits that come in that haven't played the best competition in the world. When you look at a guy like Tyler Thompson at Panther Creek, how do you compare what he's able to do against that competition versus somebody that may have played in Charlotte consistently, may have played in one of the bigger cities, Georgia, Texas, wherever? I mean, how much do you look at level of competition when you're determining what these guys can do on the next level?
That, I think, is one of the key elements to, I guess, setting your board, setting your rankings, or whatever it is, because it's never really an apples to apples comparison because of who they're going against. And typically, if you're not in one of those competitive areas, you're not going up against offensive linemen or defensive linemen who are going to be playing at that high level. And that's why, and people get frustrated at decisions that are being made at these camps and everything because guys are in t-shirt and shorts, but at least they're going up against players of their same caliber, players of their same size, and that sort of thing. So making judgments and trying in your mind with your eyes to adjust for opponent is very, very difficult. I don't know anybody who does it 100% successfully, but it's something that you got to obviously consider. And I think in general, if you have a guy putting up big numbers in Charlotte compared to a guy putting up big numbers somewhere else, you gotta factor that in.
I think the great example for that, Tommy, is recruiting has gotten to a point now where all of these high-end elite kids go to all these camps. They get in front of the cameras. Everybody sees them. I mean, it's on TV. You got analysts like Don and a lot of people who are not as good as Don. You got coaches. Everybody at every different level gets to see these kids multiple times. They know how big they are. It's not a reported 40-yard dash like it used to be. It's not kids saying, "Hey, I'm 6'4", 270," when actually they're 6'2", 245, which used to be the case. Everything's pretty transparent now. And even so, only about 50% of 5-star recruits make it to the pros. It's nuts. Those are the best of the best. And when you're talking about a 50% hit rate, and these are kids that get offered by pretty much everybody. And yet we're still talking about, hey, is this kid a bust? I don't know if bust is the right word. I think it's just a matter of, sometimes things don't work out. Yeah, you have injuries. Yeah, you have bad fits. Yeah, you have guys that don't have the passion. But it is such a difficult thing to figure out what's inside somebody. And you're going back to what you're talking about with Clements. Does somebody love football? He's not the first coach to say that, right? John Bunning talked about that a lot. Mack Brown's talked about that back in the 90s. That's what you're looking for, is the kids who love it so much that they can't live without it. And that's different than saying, hey, I like it, I want to do this. And especially now, and this is where the NIL comes in, is now it's a money opportunity. And if you come from a poor area, or even if you don't come from a poor area, I mean, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, that all of a sudden becomes life-changing money, even for middle class families. And if money is your driving factor, is that going to be enough? And I think that's what makes it challenging, because typically that's not the case. Typically, you've got to have that passion and that desire that Randy was talking about on Monday.
Yeah, I mean, what did he say? He said, "Does a kid want to come and get hit in the face every day,
Yeah.
and come to work?" And specifically, linemen and guys in the trenches. I'll say what is interesting to me is also the comment he made is that players see football as a vehicle for some sort of notoriety.
Yep.
And I guess everything we do is a vehicle to accomplish something we want. But he followed that up talking about, what does their social media look like? Are they enamored with what offers they get? And we see that. We see players pop up on social media with offered by wherever. And I probably would too, if I was a high school kid. But then he said, I want to see the guy that posts offensive line videos of him working and all. And that is one thing. And this is an aside, and it's some soapbox I've been on, is watching the fourth quarter videos for North Carolina versus the one for Clemson versus the one for South Carolina. Those South Carolina and Clemson videos, their fourth quarter video, the hype video, was all about them working, all about practice, weight room, and all that kind of stuff. And Carolina's is a hype video of highlight tapes. And Clement said, anybody can make a highlight tape. I want to see what the real tape is. And so it's an interesting dynamic there, between a perceived finesse school versus some of the others that aren't perceived that way. But Don, how do you know? How do these guys, especially, and this is why I think this is why I think NCAA screwed it up. They threw in this portal, no punishment portal, penalty portal, at the same time we're coming out of COVID, where kids are recruited, signed, commit, go and play for schools, and they never really got evaluated correctly. So how does one know what's going on in the mind without digging deep down? I mean, what does North Carolina do to get into the minds of these kids in your experience?
Well, that's kind of in the same category of, comparing footage against different competition and trying to judge how good a player is. It's the same sort of thing, because there are guys who get into the process but are hard workers, and there are definitely guys who just care about how many offers they have and want to make sure they tweet it out and want to just collect offers and basically build up their clout. So it's difficult, and you really have a limited time trying to get to know these players. You have to make a decision quickly, even with high school recruits, because you if you don't offer quickly, you're put at a disadvantage, especially if you're not a perennial playoff contender like North Carolina is at this moment. You If other schools are offering, you're kind of put behind the eight ball a little bit, so you have to make decisions really, really quickly. In general, you don't know. In general, it's hard to know somebody after a couple of conversations, and or even just having them at your campus a little bit. It's just hard to make those judgments, and so there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of gambling involved with this.
I mean, we talk about the portal purely from a player's standpoint. And Greg, I want your take on this. Is it's also a vehicle for coaches to get rid of dead weight, quote unquote dead weight, or guys they don't think can contribute. They can sort of ease them out the door and not hurt them as bad as maybe it used to be when you would basically run a guy off and he had nowhere to go.
Yeah, and that's kind of the challenge now. As I mentioned earlier, Mack and his staff have done a pretty good job because they've had to. I think this is the right approach of having conversations with kids before the season, during the season, typically during the bye week, of just saying, "Look, let's have a check-in. This is where we see you. This is how we see you projecting with the team. Uh, we don't see you playing a lot for us. So what do we do about that? Well, what we can do is we can help you find somewhere else to go and play. and of course the kid has the right to say, no, I'm comfortable here and I want to stay here. But that gets into the dead weight, if you want to phrase it like that. So that's the interesting thing. And I do think, Tommy, there have been players in the past at North Carolina um, who the coaches had an opinion of them maybe their first year or two that was not very flattering. But yet the kid grew up or something clicked, and all of a sudden they start busting their tail and they become a different player. And so a year or two later, hey, wait a minute, this is somebody that can actually play for us and can help us and maybe even start games. I mean, I've had those conversations. So it is kind of a delicate matter, but I think as long as you're upfront and you're honest with the kids, that goes a long way. That doesn't mean it's going to be clean every time, but that's kind of the approach you have to have.
We do have another letter of intent in. J. Brown Harvey. Don, this is another guy that you've talked about being a guy that you thought might be one of the better players in this class and could help North Carolina. Just sort of detail his recruitment a little bit for listeners.
Yeah, so he's another guy that's not that far away. He's actually played on, I think it was the AAU basketball circuit with Tyler Thompson. I I don't want to say that either decision affected the other, but it definitely helped UNC with both, that they were kind of trending towards UNC, and it just kind of built on itself. But he's a guy who his junior season numbers were just insane. I don't have them in front of me, but his I mean his sack numbers were just unbelievable. But you can actually put on his huddle tape, and you have them in front of you.
Yeah, I've got this is Don Callahan's war chest over here with
Okay.
his
I gave him a cheat sheet.
with his he certainly did. You've got 6'3", 215 pounds, another guy that has a frame to add some weight, but is not there physically yet. 34 and a half sacks, 50 tackles for loss, 77 QB hurries in 23 games over the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
And the majority of those came his junior season. I think I'm sure teams wised up this past season and stayed away from him.
those numbers are crazy for Southern, and you've got and that's another one of those things when we talk about levels of competition, and he's playing against guys that may not be at the level he is, but anytime you have numbers like that, Greg, in high school, period, um, you can play to some level.
Yeah, for sure. And you're really just looking for consistency, and you're looking for experience in terms of logging snaps in games against good competition. Yeah, there's always that stat at the college level with quarterbacks of, if guy has a winning record and he's won 25 games and he started for 3 years, NFL teams are much more likely to take a chance on him than somebody who came out like a Mitch Trubisky and just had 1 year of a lot of success. You want to see it continued. And I think a guy like Harvey has done that. Don, when do you see Harvey and Thompson really kind of projecting? Are these guys that are surefire power ends, or is a jack a possibility, even though they're probably at that size right now, or could they project inside at all?
So I think both of them are definitely edge guys. I think they're. I definitely like Jay Braun as that jack position, because Jay Braun actually in the Shrine Bowl played kind of a hybrid stand-up defensive end slash outside linebacker, where he was kind of off the line a little bit, had to drop into coverage, had a really nice diving interception in the Shrine Bowl practice I attended. So I definitely think he has the ability to obviously rush the passer, just looking at his numbers, but also drop into coverage and create some problems there. I think that, Thompson's interesting, because I think if you would have asked me this question, a year ago, I would have said that I felt like he was going to develop into more of a power end, but obviously would need to spend a lot of time gaining the weight and all that. But he just has developed nicely as a pass rusher, so I could see him definitely as a guy who you want, attacking the quarterback's blind side, and basically playing that jack position.
in terms of both these guys being from the Triangle and being in state, as the vibe or the momentum for Mack Brown and this program changed whatsoever in North Carolina over the past year, or as have they been able to maintain their momentum and kind of their grip as maybe the desired program and the up and coming program for a lot of these kids?
So I think with these two, obviously, Mac Brown still has that magic going. But if you just look at just the raw information, Mac didn't do as well with the top players in state with this class, and I think I'm trying to pull it up now, but I believe that UNC is only signed or only has commitments from, I think it's just 2 of the top 10 in-state players. I'm trying to pull up to double check, but you compare that to the previous years. In last year, UNC signed 4 of the top 7. The year before that, UNC signed 6 of the top 10. The year before that, we're talking 2020, Mac Brown's first full class, he signed 5 of the top 10. And you compare that to signing, we got 1, 2, well, 3 of the top 11, and 2 of those guys we were just talking about. Jabron Harvey's number 10, according to the top 247 composite, and Tyler Thompson's number 11. So that's definitely a drop in state. And if you look, in a lot of situations, maybe North Carolina doesn't like the guys in state, but Noah Rogers went to Ohio State. Davon Hobbs was a guy UNC basically had. He's committed to Tennessee. Nathan Laycock, UNC kind of went back and forth with. I think this ranking is a little too high for him, but it is what it is. He's going to Tennessee. Jamal Jarrett, a guy UNC had a really good chance with, going to Georgia. Sullivan Absher, this was more of we talk about relationships with offensive line coaches. He was kind of the first, or the not the most recent, the one before that transition with where he had a good relationship with Stacey Sherrills. Jack Bicknell comes in. It's not that he didn't like Jack Bicknell. He didn't have a relationship with Jack Bicknell and had a relationship with all the other offensive line coaches at the other schools. So Sullivan Absher ends up at Notre Dame. Chris Peel, Keith Sampson are 2 guys UNC messed with a little bit, but it realistically didn't recruit very hard, so I wouldn't consider those whiffs at all. And Rico Walker was committed to North Carolina for several months, got some off the field issues that we're not going to get into here, but it's definitely on somewhere on Inside Carolina's message board. And UNC kind of had to cut ties with him. I don't think there was really much of a choice with that.
Well, when you look at the top schools, though, as you scroll through it, I mean, one thing that's interesting to me is it's not North Carolina, but it's also not NC State or any other local school.
Yeah.
All of these guys are going outside. I mean, you can't really fault a guy like Jarrett going to Georgia when they watch how they've developed players,
especially when he's being compared to what's his name,
Jordan Davis. Yeah, I mean, that's a no-brainer. The thing is, and
I don't think it's a bad one. I don't know if
the problem is Jordan Davis is a grown man.
Well, here's the thing: is that people,
a high school player.
Jordan Davis was not a very good high school player. He just wasn't, and a lot of people wondered if he loved the game and if he was able to play the game. And I don't know. I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Jordan Davis was like a great college player either. He just was a massive human being who could run really, really well, and that looks unbelievable on film. And obviously, Georgia was able to kind of put a lot of good parts around him. But yeah, I mean, getting back to Jamal Jarrett, I mean, yeah, a big human being. I mean, is he as big as Jordan Davis? No, but if Jamal Jarrett came walking in here, you would be like, holy crap, he's going to break the couch, sort of thing.
I'd be like, how do they feed these kids?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have no idea.
I have one, and he's not near that size, and he eats like he's got a tapeworm or something.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, I mean, is it enough for North Carolina to win? Is it enough to get to the ACC championship game? Is it enough to get 9 or 10 or 11 wins a season? Is that what Carolina has to do to be able to get in these conversations for these top guys? Or is it purely the relationship type deal for the in-state guys, because you really hate to see for any state, you hate to see a guy at Millbrook
Mm,
going out of state, especially that over there. That's just something that Mac always talks about. If they don't play for Carolina, at least keep them in state.
hmm
And so that hasn't happened at all with these top guys. Is it simply winning?
I don't. Winning is in there, but I think it's more about perception and what is the view, what is the perception of the program, and obviously the perception for every program is going to be different based off of where you're located and that sort of thing. But I think that what Mac was able to do early on was change the perception of UNC. Made it, a couple of kids actually mentioned it. I think it was Gavin Blackwell said it, was that North Carolina was a cool school to go to. So I do think, like, for a guy like Noah Rogers, there is that prestige with Ohio State that he didn't feel with either of the in-state programs. And I think that it's difficult to change that. Winning over time, I think, does change it. But I don't think, I mean, if you look at the first time that North Carolina played in the ACC championship, lost to Clemson under Larry Fedora, there wasn't this massive recruiting bump afterwards. Even even those 2 years, mostly because some of it was, it's got to be sustained winning. You got to basically change the perception of this program that's been ingrained in these kids over several seasons.
Yeah, I always used Clemson as the comparison just because Clemson had a good history before Dabo, but they really hadn't done much of anything for a couple decades. And when Dabo takes over, uh, they go from winning 9 games, his first year, uh, 6-7, and then they go 10-4, 11-2, 11-2, 10-3, and then the next year is when they get to the college football playoff. So they had 4 years of double-digit wins banked before they crashed the college football playoff. And the point of that is it takes time. And that's why I think the bowl game against Oregon is so important, because if North Carolina loses that game, and Carolina is a 14.5-point underdog,
Yeah.
which seems excessive, but given how Carolina played last couple games, it makes sense. But if you lose that game, then you go into the offseason having lost 4 games in a row. There's going to be a lot of questions about kind of what happened at the end of the year, because same questions happened last year, where they closed the season with 3 straight losses to FBS opponents. But if you're able to win that game, now you're able to say, okay, we won 10 games for the first time since 2015. We played for the ACC championship and lost to Clemson. No embarrassment there. We've got Drake May coming back, who's going to be a top 3 Heisman candidate. So there's a lot you can build on, and that really helps with the recruiting cycle. And so I understand a lot of people think that the bowl games are just kind of exhibition games at this point in time, and there's some credence to that. But I think there's a lot at stake for Carolina and how they finish, and that'll show up in recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, trajectory matters.
Mm-hmm.
I think performance on a certain side of the ball matters. And I was looking at my phone. I think our food's out there.
Okay. You want to go grab it? Or
I
do you
was
want me
going.
to go?
I'll go down there and grab it. But Don couldn't get up this morning and go get food for us, Greg. So
Greg would have got here at 10 if we had him get the food.
we had Uber. We had Uber Eats deliver food. I've never done it. I'm old school. I like to go get my stuff, but we'll see. I think it's on the porch. I hope you don't have a dog like I do.
I do not. Just cats.
My dog ate a beer can the other night.
My one cat will definitely eat food.
I have a goat. But anyway, I think programs trajectory matters. I think, and this is something I want to get in later in the show with both of you, is what does success on a certain side of the ball look like? What does success on defense or lack of success on defense? How does that affect recruiting? We heard Max say that Tony Grimes and his father didn't feel like what they were doing on defense was good for them, so they left. And he said, good for them. This is exactly what the transfer portal is. How does that affect recruiting? You always talk about, Don, and I'll leave this with you while I go grab the food, is high school kids don't really have that big of a attention span
Mm-hmm.
and attention to detail. Sort of speak to all those things. NIL has changed the game for a lot of kids,
Yeah.
but as far as the attention to detail, what are high school kids looking at specifically, other than coach relationships and schools and all, in regards of where a program is going? It's a deep question.
Yes. So I think there's really two things that matter the most. One is the perception of the program, and that's the trajectory, that's the history, that's when someone brings that program up, what pops in their mind, that sort of thing. I think that's huge, and I think perception is affected by a lot of things, where you're located, what your news is covering. A kid in Arizona is going to have a different perception of North Carolina than a kid who lives in Durham, obviously. And then I think the other thing is the comfort level. And I think that your relationship with the coaching staff, the environment, and this is something that Mack Brown is. We've been picking on Mack Brown, I feel like, a lot. So I want to definitely give him some kudos. This is something that we hear a lot about, just the environment there, but the family environment. About we ran a story on Chris Culliver with a lot of quotes from his mom, and she talked about how she felt pulled in by not just the coaching staff, but by the coaches' wives and by the staffers, and that sort of thing. And I think that, feeling comfortable, and that's where, I mean, when a normal person, and I mean normal by someone who's not going to school for as an athlete, when they make a decision, yes, the academics matter. You want to make sure you have your major, but a lot of times you're making the decision based off of comfort. Do you feel like this is a place for you, sort of thing? And I think that matters too for kids who are going to school for both academics and athletics.
Yeah, I think the point you make there about Mac is spot on. He's always kind of been known as a salesman because he's such a good recruiter. The old saying back when he was in Chapel Hill, when I was in school back in the '90s, was that he could sell ice to Eskimos.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to give him credit for that. However, I think there's a negative connotation when you kind of phrase it that way. It's not that Mac is, as a politician in terms of being a BSer.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mac is just really good with people, and he understands wherever he's at, what he can sell. I mean, when he was at Texas, it's pretty easy to sell the University of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came back to North Carolina, because he had done it before, he knew what the streets were. And kind of like you say, I mean, Carolina is one of the best degrees you can get in the country. It's also the flagship university of this state. And so it makes sense, and it's a good business decision to say, well, we're going to hype those things.
Yeah.
And we're going to focus on relationships and the 40-year deal and having people live nearby so families can come and visit. So none of that stuff is out of bounds. It all makes good sense, and Mac has capitalized on that. And when you combine the fact that he really is, I mean, he is such a good person in terms of meeting individuals and actually caring and looking you in the eye and remembering your name. All that stuff is true about Mac, and so it shouldn't surprise anybody that he has the success that he has. But it's just kind of a fascinating thing that even at his age, and he's only 71, but for him to continue to recruit and to connect with kids who are 18 and 19 years old is really just, I don't know that I would say surprising, but it's very impressive.
No, absolutely. And I mean, anyone who's been around Mac at all, you definitely feel it. That
Right. Yep.
you hear all the stories about just how he remembers things and how he makes everyone feel comfortable. And before you know it, you're in the palm of his hand, basically, when you have a conversation with him. And it's very, you're right about what you said about how the negative connotation with calling a salesman, but I mean, it's very genuine. I think he generally does want to get to know people and not just your name. We have another one in, but yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely his forte. And before, because I know we have to get to this, when I talked about perception, and I think what Mac is able to do was he was able to kind of, I guess, alter the perception of North Carolina in a lot of these recruits' minds early on. And I think what kind of hurt him is last season was such a fall down that it's a lot harder to change the perception, especially after, you've been in there for a while.
Yep. Aiden Duncanson has dropped his letter of intent. North Carolina is reporting, but we've got a special guest, and I
Okay.
want to turn it over. I'm gonna give you the AirPods.
Okay.
You can have them both.
Both. Oh, so
I got a bag of food over there
Okay.
that I'm gonna eat while you talk to Mr. Kennedy Tinsley. I'm gonna bring him in the room.
Okay, I can hear him. Kennedy, can you hear me?
I can. Good morning, guys.
Good morning. Good morning. So you can, great. You want one of these? Ask Kennedy's questions. Okay. So I'm the only one that can hear you. Well, besides the people who are watching right now.
All right.
It's just you and I. We just got a delivery from Bojangles, so they're looking to dive into that. So
Gotcha, man. I understand there.
let me introduce you real quick. So this is Kennedy Tinsley. For those who don't know, played linebacker at North Carolina. What years were you at UNC?
I was there from 2005 to 2009.
Okay. All right. And I actually covered Kennedy. I think he's one of the few high school coaches who I covered as a recruit. So it's a very unique situation for me. And so I've had the pleasure of going to a couple of the high schools that you've coached at. And now you're coaching at really, an in-state powerhouse, Mallard Creek High School, just constantly producing recruits every year. And this year, you're actually sending one of your pupils to Chapel Hill. He'll be sending his letter of intent in at some point today. So for you, what's that been like, kind of being on that side of things and watching, Michael Short, who I'm talking about, a linebacker also, sign with your alma mater?
Oh, man, it's really exciting. When I first got into high school coaching, I really felt like it was important for the kids that you coach to, sign with the best school that's for them. So even though no matter what, there is a bias, I really try to be open-minded for all coaches and for all the opportunities that our kids are presented. But when the dots connect, it's really exciting. And I even told him, now, man, I consider you a brother, right? Because we will both, Lord's will, have graduated and played at University of North Carolina. So it's really exciting for sure.
So now you've gone through the process at a high level, had a bunch of scholarship offers. Now this was, though, I guess, 15 plus years ago. How has the recruiting process changed in those 15 plus years?
Yeah, that is pretty neat. Now I do think about that a lot. Actually, because we went to the Jumpman Invitational last night, me and my family, to watch the girls play. And as I'm watching, I'm just thinking about, their experience compared to the girls' experience when I played with, Ivory Lotta and Candace and some of those girls. So it is for sure changed. When I got recruited, you still had the same rules, which is interesting as far as dead periods and the visits and the structure of, going to a game and meeting coaches or and an official visit. Those seem very similar. But now as things get more competitive, there's a lot more, I guess, involved in relation to kids' visits, like pictures. It's not everybody's got a photo shoot now. Which is different. That relates to the social media thriving.
Did they do photo shoots at all? Like I thought at one point they just did them during official visits. Did you get to do one during your official?
I did not do a photo shoot, man. I am highly disappointed. Nah, nah, man. I was one of those guys that really didn't care about that stuff, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, man. So but social media has played the biggest change in recruiting now, because social media is a large part of life, which is different than 2005. So I still think that the core things don't change. The players and the coaches are going to sell the university experience. I think the structure of the visits, all those things seem to be the same. Just some variables as far as social media. And then now the newest one that's really, really changed everything is COVID and the transfer portal. That is when I saw like the biggest shift and change outside of social media. And now I think high school recruiting is looked at differently. And the structure of that is going to be different potentially. And so we'll see, how the rules, I guess, will make a difference in the next few years. But that the transfer portal is now kind of like the top way to recruit, which means that the other leagues will serve as kind of like minor leagues, essentially. And so that's a game changer.
That's great that you brought up the transfer portal stuff, because I've been asking a lot of the recruits, and I think that they don't really, obviously you're being recruited, you're not being affected by it so much. But for you, and not just with guys on the level of Michael Short, but you have a ton of guys who are going to go play FCS ball, Division II ball, and all that. Are you seeing less opportunities for those sort of guys?
Without a doubt. I mean, we should probably have Mallet Creek. We should have 6 or 7 guys signing today, and we have 2.
Oh, wow.
Which means those other guys will drop to Division II, maybe FCS, but probably Division II. And I think that'll change the cycle of the portal, because now probably they'll work their way up the portal to be Division I, but there's just not enough spots right now with guys recruiting other transfer portal players.
Okay. Michael Short, what type of player is North Carolina getting in him?
Man, just, before I even talk about him as a player, the first thing that comes to mind is him as a person. He's just a phenomenal dude. He is really well-rounded, and just kind of works and serves. He's a phenomenal leader, and he showed a lot of growth in being a leader this year for our team and our school. And that's what I'm really proud about. As far as a player, man, he's got so much untapped potential. His recruiting kind of spiked late because of his development and growth. And then when you see him, he still has a lot more development and growth as far as his potential. And he's going to work to reach, be his best. And I think he's going to be in a great situation with, Power and Cedric. So he'll be around some veteran leaders to kind of develop and grow and have time to. And so I think he'll be great, man. And he's very long, still got a lot ways to go as far as his growth in the weight room. But he's going to work hard, and he's going to get the most out of all of his opportunities. So we're really excited about his future.
So speaking of that growth that you mentioned, going into his senior season, because of that, he basically had 2 recruitments. He had his first one over the summer, which resulted in him committing to East Carolina. Then, he had the breakout senior season where North Carolina, Wake Forest, and I think it was Missouri ended up offering him. He ended up taking officials to Wake Forest and UNC. Missouri, I guess, was just a little bit too far for him and his family. What was that like? I mean, what sort of guidance did you provide him basically kind of, he had to hit the restart button and start all over again, and then he had a smaller window to make some decisions. How'd you kind of help him with that? How did he handle all that?
That's a great question. And you're exactly right. It was the first in the spring. He got 30 offers, and just that really got his recruiting going. And then by the time we got to the end of the season, man, he was a Power 5 recruit. And so as far as advice from me, towards the end, I really wanted him to just focus on what he wanted out of his experience so that he could lock in and focus on that outside of the recruiting. Because typically when recruiting is going on, it can sometimes cover you finding the best fit for you because you see all the glitz and glamour, whether it's the coach or the school itself and the things they have to offer. So that was my advice, man. Just lock in and focus on what's important to you. And I think he did a good job of that. Obviously signing with Carolina is going to be a great opportunity for him. So he's really excited about that. And, the way it came about, the more he looked at it, I think that's the one he really wanted when he looked at that last group. But I think he did a good job of being open-minded to, all of his offers, including ECU. And he's got great parent support. So they were phenomenal as far as helping him make the right choice.
Yeah. I remember when he visited North Carolina for the first, well, actually this was the second time, but for the football game, and his entire family were there, and they're all decked out in Carolina gear, which was, and it wasn't just shirts. I think it was his brother had like a Rams hat on, and everything it was funny. So last couple questions for you. One, did Tommy Thigpen, I know he coached you at UNC. Did he recruit you to North Carolina?
He did not.
Okay.
Thig, I want to say we got there at the same time. I think he was at Bowling Green. So when I came in, he came in.
Okay.
So he did not. Coach Saunders recruited me.
Brock? No, I'm sorry. Dave Brock didn't have Greensboro. Who recruited you?
Saunders. Coach Saunders.
Coach Saunders. Okay.
Yep. And then Coach Powell. I think I was a running back at the time. So those two recruited me.
That's right, because you were a fullback at Dudley.
That's right. Yep.
Oh man, God! Now it's coming back to me. So, my last question for you before I let you go, because I know you got more important things to do than talk to me.
Nah, man, I'm enjoying
it. Is what was that like? I mean, you spent a lot of time with Tommy Thigpen in meeting rooms, on practice fields, and I'm sure a lot of other settings. For however many years you were at North Carolina. And then you have him now, he's coming into your office and he's asking you about your kids. And then he offers one of your kids. What was that like for you?
It was great, man. Well, when it comes to Thig, I think you said it best, man. When you spend so many hours when you're playing college football with your coaches, and since I've graduated, he's always just been a great resource and friend. I still call him coach, all my coaches, I still call him coach. I don't call him anything else. And Thig has always been fair. He hasn't, even though he coached me and he it has been close to me, he's never like, he just comes in and does the job. And if it's a fit, it's a fit. And we've had other recruits that Carolina's wanted in the past. And if it worked out, it worked out. And if it didn't, it didn't. And he's been the same regardless. And I think that just shows his character and his heart. Thig secretly has a really good heart, man. And so it's an honor and blessing to be coached by him, and it's an honor and blessing to have a player that's, I think, going to be a good player, get to play for him.
All right. Well, Kennedy, I really appreciate you coming on. I think actually this is your day off, right?
Well, we did. I'm at the school now. We had to come in. Now there's no kids, so that makes a big difference when I come to
Yeah.
work and there's no kids. So it's all good.
Okay, so semi off day. So I really appreciate you coming in, and I promise you and I will be talking soon at some point.
That's right, man. I appreciate all that you guys do. Don, appreciate you supporting all the kids and the high school athletes, and appreciate the opportunity, man.
Oh, no problem. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bud. See you.
So we clear. Yeah, because I don't have the thing. So all right.
Kennedy's a great guy. Looking at, I was searching for kind of his background and came across a story I wrote on Kennedy, and Kennedy and I are both getting up in age, but this is from August of 2008. He had just moved to middle linebacker, and for the old heads here, you're going to kick out some of these names. Kennedy had just moved to middle linebacker in August of 08, after Mark Pascal had a concussion in practice. Kennedy had served as Darrell Mapp's backup at weak side linebacker prior to, and this is, of course, the second year of the Butch Davis era. But some of the other names in here are just phenomenal. With Deion Guy, Zach Brown was a freshman this year. Herman Davidson, who came in as a safety, switched over to linebacker. Kenneth Harris. Just a lot of good names that it seems like it was just yesterday, Tommy, and it was 15 years ago. And Tinsley arrived in Chapel Hill in 2005 as a tailback out of Greensboro.
It is crazy how the time has flown. I mean, you go back and you look at all these names. Mark Pascal used to be on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
We used to do him on the podcast and have him on there and talk about it a lot. He's been around, but you're right. Kennedy Tinsley, I mean, what a job. Mallard Creek, in Charlotte, it was Independence High there for a while. And now Mallard Creek's the school, of course, Marquise Williams. I mean, just a big time job, high school wise.
For sure. Yeah. West Charlotte, Independence, to Mallard Creek. There's a lot of talent in the Charlotte area, but you got to be able to accumulate it, and you got to be able to capitalize on it. And Kennedy's done a great job.
So just Don Callahan has stepped away, and somebody was hating on Bojangles. Like I said in the chat, what Don wants in his mantower, Don gets. So we've got $100 worth of Bojangles up here, and he said he will eat every bit of it. But he's getting coffee at the moment. But
that is the biggest bag of Bojangles that I've ever seen, Tommy.
Like a 20-pound bag of Bojangles left on the front porch, and I missed it, so it'd been sitting out there for a few days. But like I said, I am not joking. If that was on my porch, it would have been ripped into before we ever saw it. But shout out to, I believe, Alyssa, who drove that all the way from the Bojangles to Don's house out here in the big city country. Bojangles, biscuits. Greg, you're not a Bojangles guy in the morning. You're a straight coffee.
I am. I have a hard time eating anything this early. So I get
it's 8:30, man.
I'm not a skinny individual, so trust me, I get my food on after lunch. But once I start eating, I don't stop.
Yeah, indeed. So as we wait for Don to get back, we've had two other NILs or letters of intent drop.
Too many acronyms.
Really. Aiden Duncanson, Rodney Laura dropped while we were talking to Kennedy Tinsley. But Greg, looking forward here, as far as this bowl week and all, you've covered the team aplenty. What are they hoping to accomplish in these practices here? We've talked about, the transfer guys playing and all that, but what really is a team trying to accomplish in the week leading up to that bowl game?
Well, I think what a lot of people tend to forget, Tommy, is that you've got exam week in there as well. And so while you're only allowed to have 15 practices in spring ball, that rule does not apply for bowl practice. And so in theory, if you're playing on January 1st, like it used to be, where all the bowls are on New Year's Day, and your season ended Thanksgiving weekend, You could get 20 practices in pretty easy, and you can do a lot in 20 practices. I think Max said the other day they're probably only going to be able to get 12 in, which 12 seems like a lot considering that they had just played in the ACC championship game back on December 3rd. But really what you're looking to do is probably the first week is getting the guys kind of back into gear coming out of exams, because that's the period when the coaches are out recruiting anyway, and really allow some of the younger guys to get some significant reps. That's kind of the standard practice during bye weeks, is that you allow your starters to get a little bit of rest. They still get work in, of course, but you really let the younger guys really get more opportunities to kind of see how they're developing and to give them some confidence and those types of things. So typically that's the first week or so of bowl practice. And then after that, you're really focusing in on your opponent. You want to close strong. The standard week, and I think most everybody knows that, but just kind of to explain it, is Monday is a day off for the players, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are hardcore practices. Tuesday is an install. Wednesday, you kind of nail it down, and then Thursday is special situations, and then Friday is a walkthrough. And that's kind of a typical game week. And so when you get into bowl practices where you have 2 or 3 times that many opportunities to practice, you can really kind of space it out and do a lot of different things. So I really think that the key for the team is before they head to San Diego, which is soon. I don't remember exactly when Max said they were
Friday,
leaving.
I believe,
Friday.
23rd.
Once they get out there, you're still going to have some practice opportunities, but that's really an occasion to kind of celebrate the good year that you've had. That's what bowl games are about. So they'll have a lot of fun things to do out there while also getting some work in ahead of the bowl game on the 28th.
Yeah, I mean, San Diego is a great place to hang out and go. I hate it that it's so far away for the fan base and sort of how the season wrapped up. So I'm not sure how many North Carolina fans will make the trip. Flights are ridiculous. I mean, it is outrageous what it costs to fly somewhere. But like you said, it's a good opportunity to get some work in, but also to celebrate the season and sort of look back at what they've accomplished with the goal of getting better, trying to win a football game, and today is part of it. Don, while we were talking with Mr. Tinsley and about other things, now 3 more letters have dropped. Ty Adams becomes. Well, let's start with Aiden Duncanson.
Yeah, I'm gonna go by Ben's list because okay. So it looks like it was 3.
Okay. So,
Ben's list, you guys know, you always go by Ben.
Okay.
He's so meticulous.
He's the anchor.
He is the anchor. He's gonna do it right. I wasn't sure what with some of the stuff that's up there, but anyway. So Aiden Duncanson. What do you have for me with Aiden Duncanson?
You another defensive back.
Yeah.
Another East Carolina commit.
Well, we haven't talked about the other guy yet. We will.
Well,
we got two former ECU commits and defensive backs.
Tell me why that North Carolina. Why should North Carolina fans not be concerned about that aspect of this?
There's a couple of reasons. One, so UNC missed on a couple of DB targets initially, and when that happens, you got to expand your board. I think some fans think that you're just going to magically offer a 4-star that nobody knew about, and that's just not the case. So typically what happens is, college football, there is a food chain. And so you're not going to try to poach someone off of Alabama's commitment list or Clemson's commitment list. You got to go lower than that. And so they went to ECU, who actually is running a very good program over there. Yep. They've done some Mike Houston.
Yep.
I actually interacted with him a little bit when he was a high school coach in the Asheville area. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. Anyway, so I don't think it's such a bad thing because I think that they do a good job of evaluating their players and doing what they can with the limited resources they have. The other aspect of it, I think these are 2 guys who fit the profile of guys who typically outperform their ranking. And I know that's a lot of spin you're going to hear today, not just from us, but from a lot of other areas, other people who cover teams about better than rankings, that sort of thing. But these are 2 guys who primarily played quarterback at their high schools played at the 1A level in Georgia, which is the lowest classification. And so those guys don't get nearly the coverage and nearly the exposure as other guys. And so that hurts their ranking. That hurts some of their recruiting profile. But you watch Ty Adams' film, and we got an intruder here. He's super explosive. His state championship game where they lost, but he had 4 touchdowns and 200 and something yards rushing, and in limited defensive opportunities, had 2 interceptions. Aiden Duncanson, same sort of thing, played quarterback. They didn't go nearly as far, but put up some big numbers on offense. These guys have never focused on defense, but they have the tools. They're different. Ty is probably more of a cornerback, explosive, playmaker. Duncanson is probably more of a center fielder sort of safety, long, savvy, high points the ball, sees the field really well. To take those sort of tools and give them just to focus on one position and to give them the proper coaching, I think that they have the potential to exceed their ranking. Let me get rid of him real quick.
Yeah. Are you a cat person? I'm a dog person, but that cat's pretty cool. The orange ones are always pretty neat. I think the orange cats are the best because they realize that nobody cares about them, and so they're a little bit nicer than some of the prissy cats. I'm sorry, folks. I don't want to get into a cat debate. You mentioned Ty Adams and Aiden Duncanson, 2 different players, but similar situations being East Carolina. So let me ask you this, and we can talk about this, and also Rodney Laura's letter is in as well, and he committed just yesterday, a little bit ahead of the schedule Don thought he would. But
what he told me. So this is not something I made up or someone told me who had heard it somewhere. He literally told me he was going to announce on signing day, but it is what it's just what we deal with.
Hey, folks just have to get it out. And it's high school guys and high school kids, and they tend to do whatever the moment says. But looking, you mentioned playing offense in high school and then switching over to defense. We've seen that a lot with, a lot of great players at North Carolina, Bruce Carter, Quan Sturdivant playing quarterback in high school.
Mike Hughes.
Mike Hughes. Who was that? I'm well aware who Mike Hughes is. That'll get a flame war started on the Inside Carolina message boards. But looking at those, how does a guy like Charlton Warren, when he's recruiting these guys for his room, how does he mesh that if they're not defensive guys in high school? I mean, it's all projection, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously he's got experience recruiting them. He's got experience in the room. But ultimately, it's a projection and a hope, right? Tell me otherwise.
It's kind of what we talked about with Tyler Thompson earlier, is that, this is more art than science with this stuff. And you're basically looking at a kid. You're looking at his physical tools. You're looking at, his explosiveness, his playmaking ability, and you're trying to project what that will do at defensive back. And I assume some coaches are better at doing it than others. I don't know if there's any sort of research that actually supports that, but there have been definitely players who have primarily played quarterback in high school and developed into great DBs. And there have been situations that didn't pan out. We saw Mack Brown. He just entered the transfer portal. Probably didn't receive enough time to develop, and I think maybe some of that was he wasn't recruited by the current defensive coaches. He was a Jay Bateman guy, but he was a kid who primarily played quarterback in high school, and everybody was recruiting him as a defensive back. And at North Carolina, at least, it didn't work out. Perhaps it works out. I guess he picked ECU, right?
Yep.
So perhaps
that East Carolina to North Carolina pipeline back and forth.
It goes both ways. It's not a one-way street.
Yeah, really.
If you look at Camaro's there, what about the center who actually
Avery Jones
and left going to Illinois. Wouldn't North Carolina love to have a kid who has the ability to play in the Big Ten at center? But and Tamir's a great kid, so hopefully everything works out for him. But so there are plenty of examples that don't work out also. So there is some art to it.
So you got Duncanson, you got Adams, you got Laura. Let's talk a little bit about Laura, a late guy on the scene. Don, a good pickup for North Carolina. I mean, it seems like it sort of came out of the blue. Can you sort of detail that a little bit as your mid bite as to how it came about? And obviously, like you mentioned earlier, it came back a little quicker than you thought it was going to. As we were running this setup yesterday, I hear Don fussing at his phone because Laura has committed. When it was you were ready to go though.
We were ready.
It seemed like you almost knew it.
Well, we were ready. Just we've learned to be ready as soon as we know. Just because these kids will not always announce when they tell you they're going to announce, and he was supposed to announce today, not yesterday. But his situation was North Carolina offered him initially back in March for whatever reason. Mostly because UNC liked a lot of other guys on their board better. They kind of moved on a little bit. He moved on, officially visited UVA, and I believe Rutgers, committed to UVA, then 3 months later decommitted from UVA. I don't know what his plans were before North Carolina got involved, but I guess it was a week or two ago, maybe it was just a week ago, UNC put on his film, really liked it, felt like, hey, let's take a shot. If you follow this last couple of years, Mack Brown has done this, has come back on guys. There was the offensive lineman from Virginia who signed with Virginia Tech that UNC brought in for an official visit. There was Benji Gosnell that UNC got back in with. So Mack Brown has definitely done this in the past. Those situations obviously didn't work out, but this one did. They saw him in person, felt like his physically he looked a lot better than what they remembered the first time around. Brought him in for the official visit. The entire staff liked it, and he committed during the official visit. And as I said, he was supposed to announce it on Wednesday. Decided to announce it like literally it was what, maybe less than an hour after I just posted the visit story, and he committed to North Carolina.
Don, he's listed at 6'4", 270. Do you see him as like a 3 technique? Does he project? He seems like he'd be too small to play nose.
Yeah, so I think he's probably more of a 3 tech guy. But and the thing with him, if you put on his film, he's great film. Plays hard, plays snap to whistle sort of guy, very active hands, just motor is overwhelms offensive linemen. I think some schools are a little bit worried by his measurables. I don't know if he is exactly 6'4". I would guess he's probably shorter than that, and I think some schools were turned away by that, and some other aspects too. But he's definitely a player, and I think you always take the guy who has produced on film over the guy who has all the measurables, because I think we've seen a ton of guys who had the potential. Keyshawn Silver was a toolsy guy, ton of potential. Never seemed to be able to do much at North Carolina. Hopefully he finds something. He hasn't landed anywhere, has he?
Not yet.
Yeah, so hopefully he finds something. Great kid. And I think he's one of those kids that the COVID stuff really impacted him, because I don't think he had access to training and workout areas that some of the other kids did. And so I think he put on a lot of weight during that time. But anyway, that's a different topic.
I want to get into that topic, but we'll shelve that for a minute. What stands out about Rodney on film? What pops?
Well, as I said, I think it's his motor. I mean, he just plays so hard against the competition, and as I said, I mean, it's just overwhelming for blockers to keep track with him.
So they are coming fast and furious. But Rodney Laura, 6'4"-ish. We'll say ish, since Don's not 100% sure. He's 6'4", 30th out of Virginia, defensive lineman, potential 3 tech for North Carolina. Amari Campbell, Don, is in the hopper.
Yeah, so this is while I'm talking about him, Tommy, why don't you pull up Amari Campbell's junior season highlights? All right. And so this kid plays, and this is a phrase that Ross Martin loves. He plays with his you got just Google huddle, his huddle.
Yep.
Ross Martin loves this phrase. He plays like his hair's on fire. This kid,
I do. For the record, I don't know what y'all are talking about.
Okay, so he,
Obviously.
as soon as he sees this, I'm talking about Amari Campbell. As soon as he sees the ball, he makes a beeline for that ball carrier at top speed, and there's film of this, blows up blockers along the way. Yeah, I think the issue is you're not going to be able to do that at the college level. So he's going to have to learn how to take on blocks and shed blocks and evade blockers. But he is a guy who plays hard. Definitely piled up the tackles in his high school career. Tommy's taken forever to pull up this highlight.
Your internet or something. I'm just.
Hey, this internet is working great.
I can't show it to people.
No,
Okay,
I know, but I just wanted to get your, and of course the ad comes up. I just wanted you to just see what I was talking about as far as he's concerned. But yeah, I mean, so he's a guy who just plays hard. He's a stout kid. He's not the tallest kid, but he's built like a tank, and just piles up the tackles.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I mean, Charlton Warren tends to like bigger defensive backs.
Mm-hmm.
Campbell, 6 foot 215 linebacker.
Yeah.
Obviously Cedric Gray's bigger than that. Power Echols probably a little shorter than that. Is there sort of a theme that you've seen with Thigpen or with the staff in general, where they, size is not as big a factor for potential middle linebacker height wise? I mean, is that a thing, or is it just who they see and who they like?
I think it depends on the staff. A lot of staffs now really like those taller, longer linebackers because even though they're more finesse, they cover a lot of ground to defend the pass. So it's actually kind of nice to see North Carolina go back to the old school Mike linebackers with not just him, but a guy we'll talk about at some point in Caleb Lavallee. He's not up there now. But speaking of kids, I mean, this is the text message I just got. Now, keep in mind, my daughter is at school right now. I get asked what the Netflix password is. That's the question I get.
And she's in class.
She is in class. So maybe there's some sort of assignment.
Do you need to walk over there and get her? Because you can just walk over there.
I can just walk over. No, they're going to stay in school until it's a half day. But yeah.
So if you're listening or watching and you're not tuned in to Inside Carolina, Ben Sherman's got it nailed down on the Tar Pit Premium message board, all the official signed letters of intent thread. Grigsby, Thompson, Harvey, Duncanson, Laura, Ty Adams, and Amari Campbell. 7 out of 20 and potentially 21, depending on.
No, 7 out of 19, potentially 20.
Potentially 20, and then as well as some of the transfer portal commits that they have. Go ahead, Greg.
Tommy, breaking news: North Carolina has moved up to number 24 in the national rankings currently as of 8:39 a.m. Eastern time. As we talked about earlier.
You know why?
I assume somebody lost a recruit. Yeah, I don't think this will be a top 25 class, just because there's so many programs behind that. I mean, like Ole Miss has 12 commitments, Louisville has 13. UCLA has 14. So I imagine a few of those schools may jump ahead. But a lot of people kind of panic when talking about this class not being potentially a top 25 class. I don't think it's really that big of a deal. I mean, ideally, if you could have top 5 classes every year, you'll take it, of course. But Carolina had 3 top 15 classes in a row. That's kind of your base. And as long as you have some really good pieces, and this is not a massive class anyway, but if you can have some smaller classes that are still in the top 25 range and you hit on some of those lesser recruited guys, you've got to have good depth. And I think in the transfer portal era, especially, if you have too many 4 and 5 star guys who expect to play from day one and they don't have success, that they may move on. So the roster management part of it is a fascinating aspect, Tommy. But I think this is a good class, just in terms of how it's built. And I think as long as you can kind of bounce back next year and have a little bit stronger class, a class that's fringe top 25 is not going to hurt in your effort to kind of get to a place where you can compete for championships.
Yeah, what's interesting is, Carolina's two biggest recruits in the last 2 or 3 years are both in the portal.
Right.
And you got a guy like Cedric Gray who was not highly recruited. That's probably going to be an All-American next year if he continues to trajectory. And I've said that word a lot today, and he was, second or third team this year. So I mean, to your point, Greg, the splash is not there, but the needs are being filled. And then it comes back to player development. Is how well the staff can develop guys. And it's been interesting to watch that aspect of it over the last 3 or 4 years of Mack Brown, is who gets better, who does not, who moves on. And with the portal, like you just mentioned, if somebody's not happy, they're out, and they can go wherever they roam, they can check out. So this class will not, the story of this class will not be told until what are we, 2022 right now, 25 and all. And so that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, Dave Glenn for the ACC Sports Journal. I think one of the best things that he ever did there was he would do the 5 years after recruiting rankings about how guys, how their careers turned out compared to what the projections were, how beneficial those classes were. I think that's a ideal way to look at it. We're not in that type of society, right? I mean, we're in a impulsive, right now society, and so today is what we're celebrating. Of course, that's good for the three of us and that inside Carolina. But really, in hindsight, you kind of want to look back and say, okay, well, who are the kids that were undervalued? Who are the kids that were overvalued? And you talk about player development, and I think North Carolina's defensive line room is really a place where we could have a long, lengthy discussion, Tommy. Carolina's already gotten a couple kids in we've talked about today that have signed today, more 4-star kids. But yet you look at kind of the guys that have really stood out along the defensive line for Carolina, and you're talking about Raymond Vahesic, who was a JUCO, Noah Taylor, who was a transfer from Virginia, Kamon Rucker, who was not a big time recruit.
He was going back to what I was saying earlier. He was a production guy, terrible measurables.
Right.
So,
but his burst off the ball is probably the best that Carolina has. I think Carolina really missed Tamari Fox this year. You talk about Tamon Fox and kind of what he brought with his dad helping him along. I mean, Tamari was a elite level wrestler. And I think he's going to be a big boost for that defensive line next year. But then you get into some of the other guys who are big time recruits, the 4 and 5-star guys. We haven't to this point really seen them kind of play up to that potential. So I think that's going to be a big thing for North Carolina this offseason, is to get that defensive line to start playing to its potential. Because offensive line wise, Carolina hasn't had a ton of success in terms of signing big names. Everybody knows Zach Rice and what's expected out of him, but he's kind of been the exception. And even so, North Carolina has been able to have some really good offenses lately. We know we've had the conversation about the inability to run when you want to run at times. But I think the ability to develop talent at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball is really going to determine how far Mack can get this program to be. We know when you recruit at the level that Mack recruits at, your floor really comes up. But in order to get to that next level where he wants to take North Carolina and where North Carolina fans want to go, you've got to be able to coach those guys up at least to their production level, if not higher. And that's a lot easier said than done.
It kind of reminds me of the golf adage, and it. You're a pro. The difference between a scratch golfer and a PGA Tour golfer is big,
Massive.
And the difference between North Carolina winning 9 ball games and putting up a great offense versus Ohio State, Georgia, even Clemson, obviously, there's a big gap there. And I think the gap is closed when you develop the defensive line, you develop the offensive line, because I think you can finesse, and I've talked about this before, you can finesse offense and you can finesse points and all, but when it gets down to crunching time in the red zone, you can't really finesse that. And we saw that over the last 4 years. And then on the defense, you got to have dudes. And if you don't, you're going to get run over by teams that have them. And I think somebody in the chat mentioned recruit guys with chips on their shoulders. Well, that's part of the getting to know these guys. And that's one thing that Randy Clements talked about, is wanting to get into the heads and understand where they're coming from and what drives them. And that's the challenge across the board. Sure, getting more talent matters. Guys that are 5 stars, it is a scientific fact that they have a better chance of getting to the next level or being better. But for a team like North Carolina in a class like this, is find guys like Rucker, like Gray, like the Foxes, and guys that can produce on the college level. But Greg, to your point, it comes back to the trenches. You talked about it in your article that I believe you posted yesterday or maybe this morning on Inside Carolina. If you can't win the trenches and you can't control the line of scrimmage, your ceiling's only so high.
You agree with that, Don?
Yeah. And I think to kind of speak to Tommy's point, if you look at it, I watched a lot of Group of 5 ball, watched a lot yesterday, and those defenses are absolutely terrible. But there's a lot, like, they're really, really bad. But there's a lot of those programs end up fielding really good offenses. And it speaks to Tommy's saying you can scheme a good offense, you can finesse a good offense, but it's a lot harder. You need the Jimmies and Joes for the defense. The other thing I wanted to mention was I found out why North Carolina moved up. In case anyone cared, Baylor actually lost a commitment. Austin Novosad, quarterback, 4-star guy, and that dropped Baylor. So they are. North Carolina's up to 25 right now.
And Oregon flipped him because the Moore kid flipped from Oregon to UCLA the other day.
Yeah, the QB dominoes. Yeah.
And talking about the trenches, when we look at the ACC recruiting rankings currently, Miami has got the number 3 class in the country, so they're leading the pack. And in terms of the trenches, they've got commitments from 2 top 20 guys nationally along the offensive line, and then 2 top 100 kids on the defensive line. So Mario Cristobal, it looks like he's going to have things rolling now. Is he a great game day coach? I don't think so.
No,
but
there is no coach more Miami than Cristobal, is there not?
Right.
I mean, he's known as this great recruiter who can't coach on game day. Miami, ever since early 2000s, I guess, they've recruited really well.
Larry Coker, yeah.
And ever since Larry Coker, recruited really well, but have had terrible teams, never could put it together. But we have another letter of intent in.
Yeah, man. These things, they catch me off guard.
Do you want me to introduce them, or do you?
No, I got them. DJ Geth, Dorman High School, a legacy.
Father
Ed Geth played a little basketball at North Carolina. Tell us about DJ and what he brings, could potentially bring on the offensive line now for Coach Randy Clements.
Yeah, so it's funny looking at it now. It seems like such a slam dunk to keep with the puns with that, but there was a point where I really thought South Carolina was going to steal him. He lives obviously in South Carolina. His best friend, Marquis Anderson, who UNC also recruited, committed to South Carolina. Many viewed him as there's a glitch. I got to fix that.
Oh my God.
It's probably because his name is DJ. It probably causes a problem. So you're going to have to go. Anyway, people who are watching have no idea what we're talking about. But yeah, he stuck with the legacy thing. He did talk about just how difficult it was to make the decision between the 2 programs. But this is a kid who plays at a high level at South Carolina. Dorman High School is one of the top programs in that state. And he played He's one of the bookend tackles for the most part, although he has experience basically playing every position along the offensive line there. I think North Carolina is hoping that he develops into a center. And that's what we're seeing, because a lot of people saying, one of the questions I get a lot is, what centers are North Carolina recruiting? And the problem is that most high schools aren't playing their best offensive lineman at center. So typically what colleges have to do is recruit guys that they hope can turn into centers. Actually, in this situation, we talked about Robert Grigsby earlier, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he's the first one to come in. I think the hope is that both these guys are going to get a shot at center. Hopefully one of them works out as a center. Either way, they both are interior guys who, DJ in particular, he's not the best athlete, but he plays hard, definitely plays till he puts his defender on his back, sort of thing. Has a surprising mean streak because he's just a really nice kid off the field. But I think whether it's center, whether it's guard, I think that he's going to bring something for North Carolina.
So I have a question, and this is an interesting question, folks that could look at this. 6'4", right? He's listed as 6'4", but you describe him as a squatty interior lineman.
Yeah, so I've always suggested when you look at these listed heights and weights to just look at them as a grain of salt, because with a grain of salt, because they're often exaggerated. And I like to, when I do my rankings and when I do my evaluations and stuff, and this is one of the negatives about the COVID stuff, is that we haven't had a whole lot of camps the past couple of years. And, and then Nike kind of jumped out, and the opening doesn't do as many as they were doing. So we don't have a whole lot of verifiable heights and weights. So, which makes things difficult. But I promise you, if DJ came in here, he's a big kid, but he's not 6'4".
Not to get too far off topic, Don, but we've referenced it a couple times about COVID. How detrimental was that time period for that particular recruiting class? I know that's a very difficult thing to quantify. Yeah. But I mean, have you heard from coaches along the high school ranks, and just in terms of the inability for coaches to properly evaluate and for kids to find good matches at the college level?
Absolutely. And I think it hurt the state of North Carolina more than any other state in this area, just because if you remember, in the public school, the NCHSAA, they played their season in the spring, where colleges have to have their boards set and have an idea of what's going on well before that. Because if, film's not coming out until April or May, other states are playing, you have your board set off of those states. If you look back, I was actually looking back at that class, and UNC didn't offer a whole lot of in-state guys. Really, the top 10, it was solid, but it wasn't as deep of a class. And I think a lot of it had to do with the lack of opportunities. And kids like Bo Atkinson, for example, took advantage of it and worked his butt off every second he could with that extra time. But I think a lot of other kids didn't have access. We talked about Keyshawn Silver a little bit. Didn't have access to, to weight rooms, to facilities, to trainers, and all that sort of stuff. And that affected them a lot.
We saw guys working out with cinder blocks and carrying around gallon buckets and all that type of stuff. You're right. I mean, it benefited people that had access.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned Keyshawn Silver. I mean, if you followed his recruitment and you listened to Don and Ross in previous podcasts back then, I mean, it's a struggle for folks, for some folks during that time. So it is an interesting thing. They're laughing in the chat about the squatty comment. Slagle, my man, is a hardcore inside Carolina person. Don, you will get to know him. If he is not in every chat, he's in almost every chat, and he's always pretty active, and we appreciate it. Let's back up and talk about Miami just briefly, because that is a team that North Carolina will have to deal with. Without the transfer portal, Mario Cristobal would be in trouble, right? Or would he be, Greg? Because he basically, they were terrible this year. Um, but he basically wanted to have a full roster reset. And there's been other teams across the country, but I think Miami, probably more so than any team in the conference, is going to look completely different maybe next year because of the portal and what they're able to bring in, and whatever they do with the bags of cash.
Yeah, there's good and the bad with the portal, right? Because if you remember back just a couple years ago when Mack Brown was here, first got here in November of 2018, that was a very quick turnaround with the signing day. And so I know there was a couple guys that had committed, and Mack evaluated them, and they came to a decision to kind of part ways. But the portal wasn't in place at the time. And so it wasn't as though Matt could do a complete overhaul and kind of have guys leave so he could clear out room for new talent. Well, that's changed now. And so especially if you're a good recruiter and you have means to utilize funds for NIL like Mario does, you can completely rebuild your roster quicker than you ever could before. I mean, look at Mike Norvell at Florida State. I think that's a good example. He had to do a complete refurb in terms of culture and personnel, and he came in prior to the portal. And so it took him a longer time. But when you look at what Mario's been able to do, I mean, he's going to sign a top 5 class, and I know they've been talking to recruits about trying to jump up on Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia to try to get the number 1 class. They're already at 24 commits. They'll probably sign a few more. They've got a few more they're looking at. Sure, they'll have plenty of guys come in through the portal, which means there's going to be more guys to go out through the portal. And so you just have much more availability and really a luxury to revamp your roster in quick order. And that was not the case just a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating to watch Miami with Tyler Van Dyke being so good 2 years, I guess, last season, and then this year struggling real bad. And then, the way it sort of went down, it kind of reminds me, and obviously we don't pay attention to rosters, individual player rosters for other teams as much as we do in basketball, but Miami's going to be like like I watched Duke and Wake Forest basketball last night, and I recognized one guy, Jeremy Roach, on the floor. And that, obviously you'd heard about recruits for Duke, but Miami will look completely different, significantly different next year.
Yeah, and I think the Duke game last night is kind of a good example too of there's a lot of really good players on the floor for Duke, but most of them are freshmen, and I know a couple younger guys played. But if you don't have an elite guy like Apollo Banchero, they just look like very talented freshmen. I mean, I don't know how you can look at that Duke team and say, wow, well, that's going to be a national title contender, right? Yeah. And that speaks to the issue of relying so much on fresh faces, especially young guys. And so while Miami is going to have a top 5 class today, I think if they're banking on those guys turning in elite performances next year, that's probably asking a lot. And that kind of goes back to Travis Shaw and Zach Rice didn't play a whole lot this year. Zach Rice really didn't play any, even though they're 5-star guys. Got to give them time. Got to let them develop. And that's part of the trajectory. That's part of the program building process.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me when you talk about Zach Rice not playing a lot. And I know that he wanted to play a lot, and I know that people around him wanted him to play a lot. But everybody always references, well, Georgia plays 2 freshman offensive linemen or whatever, and it's like that's because you hear about that. You don't hear about, and Don, you speak to this all the time. You don't hear about the 500 other freshman offensive linemen that are redshirting or not playing, or so. I agree. It's a process. You don't want, if you can build a program such that you don't have young guys being the centerpieces, I think that is what Mack Brown's trying to do here.
Yeah. So we'll get to it, but we have another one in. But so I'll just respond to you. One of the things I like doing that gives me, I feel like a lot of information, and I put it in the weekly scoop during the season, is keeping track of the true freshman playing time, snap count, and all that sort of stuff. Because I know people are probably tired of me bringing it up, but I took a lot of heat this time last year for a couple of months about Andre Green and about Zach Rice. And I mentioned, particularly with Zach Rice, because we had guys like Steve Wilfong, who does an unbelievable job. Steve is amazing, especially when it comes to projecting where these guys are going to sign and all that. But saying that those guys, that Zach Rice and Andre Green were going to play a ton as true freshmen. And I kept on pointing out that mathematically, that just doesn't happen, especially at the offensive line. And there was nothing against Zach Rice or Andre Green. Andre Green's dad is a huge fan of the Scoop podcast, has been on at least once, maybe twice. So it's nothing against those guys, but they just don't play very much. And as you mentioned, we hear about it because it's a big deal when someone does play. With that said, I'm surprised by the lack of playing time for some of those guys, particularly in games like, I guess, the Virginia Tech game got out of hand. I feel like there's a couple other opportunities that some of the younger players could have just at least gotten in and didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, am I wrong in this? I mean, what do you?
I think absolutely against Virginia Tech. I mean, Carolina wanted to win that game easily, but they could have gotten.
Yeah.
They could have played they could have played second string the whole second half, and that game's never in doubt.
And get the Virginia kids in there.
But the issue, though, that pretty much the entire season, and we've talked about this, is they beat FAMU pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as good as they expected.
Yeah.
But then everything else was pretty tight.
Yes.
Except for the Virginia Tech game. And what you can't do.
Well, Georgia State, they were able to get some guys in.
They did, but that was a 7-point game.
Yeah, that was. Yeah.
And they had how many turnovers in that game to keep Georgia State in it. So that you sort of have to force feed, similar in basketball. You got to force feed the young guys in there.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised that a guy like Rice didn't play a ton, just because what we'd heard and what we were seeing on the field. But yeah, to your point, I mean, young guys, when they play at Georgia, you're going to hear about it.
Yeah.
When they're everywhere else and they don't play, we don't know about it. And so it's just an interesting dynamic. Letter N, Julian Randolph, Independence High School, Virginia, tight end, 6'5", 220 pounds, a John Lilly recruit.
Mm-hmm.
Don, another, I guess, technically a flip, committed to Vanderbilt earlier this year.
So I think
came back to North Carolina.
So I think Barton Simmons, former 24/7 Sports analyst, he found this kid early on. They jumped on him. He didn't have a whole lot of opportunity, so he committed to Vanderbilt. Once other schools started to put on his tape, saw some potential in him, like North Carolina, UCLA was also involved. Miami was also involved. They offered him. He opened up his recruitment. So he actually it was kind of almost a restart. I wouldn't consider it a flip per se, but because he decommitted, then went and took visits to UCLA, Miami, and North Carolina. Had initially planned on taking officials to Miami and UNC. Miami filled up, so he canceled the Miami official, committed to North Carolina. But he's he's a great comparison for him is Bryson Nesbitt.
That's what I was going to say. It appears to be a younger version of Bryson Nesbitt.
Yes, he's a big wide receiver at the high school level, but he doesn't maybe not fast enough, get enough separation to play that outside receiver at the college level. You move that sort of guy, as we're seeing with Bryson Nesbitt, you move that sort of guy to tight end and move him around a little bit, and you can really create some mismatches. And I think that's what Randolph is going to do at North Carolina.
So let me ask you this. Kendall Carr, transfer portal, but you've got Kamari Morales, Copenhagen, and Nesbitt, the aforementioned Nesbitt, all really similar, almost a clone of Nesbitt, and then you got Copenhagen and Morales as your traditional tight ends. Is this a guy, I mean, clearly you're most likely going to redshirt, but is he a guy that you can see make significant impacts maybe after that redshirt season? Because Morales will move on. Well, I say that, But
He might get a 9th year of eligibility. You never know.
Really, you assume that he will be gone eventually, and then the other guys. North Carolina managed to keep 3 tight ends extremely happy this year,
Mhm.
and I thought that was an interesting dynamic compared to the Sam Howell years with Phil Longo's offense. I mean, they virtually didn't exist,
Mhm.
and then Drake. But is this a guy who you can see coming in filling a role not next year, unless something catastrophic happens, but down the line and sort of be a possession type guy, or is he going to be a bigger play type guy? Because I think the tight ends, the involvement in the offense for North Carolina, I think that was a separating point for me from the last couple of years as far as offensive production.
Yeah, so I think to answer your question, after a year, redshirt year, I definitely could see him contributing, especially if we see some exits. Yeah, attrition. Um, because I think he has a good frame. He definitely has a good frame. Has some bulk on him already. Probably want to mold that a little bit better, which the strength and conditioning staff and the nutritionist will do over the course of his redshirt year, and then he'll be able to definitely contribute pretty early on in his UNC career.
Let me ask you a question, Greg. What do we think of John Lilly as a coach at North Carolina? I mean, so when you look at coaches and say such and such is a great coach, great position coach, is it purely based on the production of their room, or is it something that we've seen? Because, like I mentioned just a second ago, that tight end room, those virtually the same guys were in it and didn't do much. But then this year, um, how much of that falls on the coach and a guy like Lilly that everybody considers one of the best on the staff?
Got Don crawling around over here.
And he just hit our camera too. And almost knocked the light down. No, it's good. It's good.
Well, Lily's had a great reputation as a position coach and as a good recruiter for a long time. And tight end is one of those unique positions where you only have typically one guy on the field at any given time. And so those guys tend to get overlooked. But to your point, with the limited number of wide receivers on scholarship this year, which Mack Brown harped on last offseason about how they were trying to kind of get those numbers up. This was an opportunity for the tight ends really to become a bigger part of the offense. And they did that, to your point. And I think Longo did a good job kind of working them in more, having somebody like Nesbitt who can kind of split out. A lot of the tight ends play detached now anyway. But for Lilly to be able to have 3 talented guys who were prepared, who did their job well, who are good blockers, he did what he needed to do. So I think when you're talking about one guy being good, okay, well, that's to be expected. But when you've got your entire 3 deep able to contribute, that means you're doing something right. And I think that's important. The other thing I want to throw in here, we've talked so much about the COVID year in terms of eligibility and how that gives everybody an extra year. And so you got guys that are 24, 25 being able to play because they get an extra year of eligibility. Bryson Nesbitt is part of that first kind of group after, where he doesn't get a COVID year because he wasn't here during COVID. And so he's going to be a junior and really only has 2 years of eligibility left, even though he's got 3 years to play those 2. So when you start talking about some of these guys that are in the underclassmen groups now, they're not going to have that potential for a 6 year. And with him and Copenhaver and Kamari Morales kind of getting up there, that's the importance of a guy like Randolph coming in, because there is separation in terms of eligibility. But that's a guy that while next year you don't necessarily need him, that's a very important development year because they may need him very quickly, not just because of attrition, but because of the loss of players through loss of eligibility.
That's the thing. And if you're watching this and you don't go on Inside Carolina's recruiting board, not the 24/7 recruiting board, the go on your Inside Carolina page, go to the 3 dots, pull down the football recruiting board there. That's Don Callahan.
Tommy just discovered it yesterday.
No, I had seen it.
He's seen it. He heard about it.
Man, he calling me out. But look to Greg's point, back on track. You look and you see that, Kamari Morales, senior year eligibility junior wise, Copenhagen junior sophomore eligibility wise, Nesbitt sophomore. Greg Barnes does not eat. He's a machine. He's a Terminator.
He does not eat. I've never seen Greg Barnes eat, actually.
I don't understand.
Drink, probably to oil the machine.
I don't understand, and I don't want to say. I'm not going to say what I'm thinking, but I'm thinking of like the 400-pound guy in the basement. As much as you're over there eating, I can't believe that you're not the 400-pound guy in your man towel because you were kicking back the food left and right. But anyway,
Job of the Hunt platform.
And we gotta get Tommy in the Princess Leia outfit.
No. I'll jump
The
out the
IC
window.
recruiting show in 2030 is going to be Don laying out on the couch.
We saw that last year, didn't we? With the socks. I was told just no socks. Let's get back on track, fellas. Right. Shout out to the 414 people that are in the live chat right here. We've been going for 2 hours and 11 minutes and 52 seconds here at Inside Carolina Live signing day show. Some famous folks are now in the chat. We've got Taylor Vippolis bounced in, Joey Powell bounced in. I saw Ross in there earlier. Alan Tyndall asked, and I'll bring this question up. It'll be the first question I put on the board. And Don, this is for you. He asked me, but it's for you. We know if any of these recruits will be January enrollees. The answer to that is yes. Tell us who.
So we covered this in the Weekly Scoop this week.
Is that another reason to be an Inside Carolina?
That is another reason. The Weekly Scoop is a great use of your time to read it on Tuesdays. Although I probably should let people know we will not be doing a Weekly Scoop next week for a lot of different reasons. I'm assuming you could probably figure it out. But so UNC has nine expected early enrollees. Paul Billups, Christian Hamilton, both wide receivers, linebackers Amari Campbell and Michael Short. All three of the offensive line pledges. We talked about two of them, DJ Gath and Robert Grigsby, and then also Nolan McConnell, who hasn't sent his letter in yet. We do have a new letter in, so we'll get to that. And then two other guys we talked about, Jabron Harvey, Tyler Thompson, and also quarterback Tad Hudson. Do you want to
bring it in? Caleb Cost has just added his name to the list, the 10th letter of intent from North Carolina. Grigsby, Thompson, Harvey, Duncanson, Laura, Adams, Campbell, Geth, Randolph, and now Caleb Cost. I will say this, best name in the recruiting class, in my opinion. The cost of doing business as a defensive back.
He also spells his name with a K. My son spells his name with a K, is a Caleb with a K also.
Okay. With respect to the young man we just got a letter of intent notice on, I will not say that your son's name is spelled wrong.
Okay.
Cost out of Sandy Creek High School in Georgia. Another Georgia recruit. Charlton Warren seems to love some Georgia, Don.
Yes. Well, he's an Atlanta native and really has kind of made his name as a recruiter, recruiting that area. He knows the trainers there, has a lot of ties to the high school coaches. I can remember when he was hired the first time around, I went to, I believe it was Tamon Fox's high school at the time, sat down with his high school coach. And as I said, Warren was just hired and he spoke very highly of Warren and just his relationship he had with him. And so that obviously only helps recruit players in that area. But yeah, so Caleb Cost is a two-sport kid, probably going to be drafted. I don't know if we know yet if it's going to be high enough to impact whether he ends up in North Carolina or not. I've asked him about that, and he's unsure and he's undecided. I think that's probably the right approach. You want to wait to see where you're actually drafted and what the opportunity is before you make a decision. But if he ends up in North Carolina, which is, I think, the expectation right now, he'll play both sports. He's a kid who played both ways for a state championship team. It's one of the higher levels. I don't believe it was the highest level in Georgia, but definitely played against some big time competition. I had his, let's see, I do have his stats up. He had some really good receiving numbers.
I've got you 63 for 11, 69, and 14 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. Just curious, just curious. Why do we combine junior and senior stats on our list?
Well, you have I have the actual the senior year. On that,
This is what you provided me.
that's
And
what I
said,
provided
know
you,
this. Yeah.
and that's just it gives you a better grasp of it, I guess.
I mean, I
I mean, it
guess.
depends. It wasn't for every guy. It's just if the junior senior seasons were good, and just make sure you could look at it.
So looking at what you have listed, physicality, an inside the box guy, a nickel, sort of give us a player comp on the currents. I mean, is it Conley?
Ooh,
Is DeAndre
no, it's not
Boykins?
Conley. Although I think he's probably a nickel guy. He's more of a cover. He's a nickel guy, but he's more of a cover guy. But he's physical, but he's not on the level of Connolly as it. God, I don't even know if I would bring up Boykin either for him, because I think he's more of a hybrid nickel safety, and even he could play some corners. I don't think North Carolina, off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone on North Carolina's current roster that I would compare him to, because he is a little bit more versatile and can, he could play corner, he could play safety for North Carolina. I just think that because of his physicality, because of his comfort inside the box, that nickel spot is probably his best fit.
Well, as we've seen, and we saw a lot this year, if you have a nickel that doesn't have those coverage skills,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to get cooked
Yes.
repeatedly, and we saw that. We saw teams take advantage of it. We saw Boykins get taken advantage.
Well, so
of
I guess that's what I would say. I would say that he brings that coverage skills to he is. I hate to compare a college kid to a high school kid at similar stages. Let's just say coming out of high school, Koss is a better cover guy than Boykin was, and than Connolly was coming out of high school. Whereas both of those guys, way more physical, way more, I guess, successful in run support.
Don, we used to talk about tweeners a lot, and that kind of became like an ideal skill set. Once spread offenses blew up 15 years ago, with the jack position really being, you need to be able to rush off the edge while also having strength to deal with tackles and tight ends as one of these hybrid positions. Then you've also got the nickel, where they're using that role. And, I keep going back to Cam Chancellor as like the ideal guy, right? Of somebody who can light you up in the box, but can also cover. Even though that's kind of a tweener type role, are those guys just few and far between that can do everything?
Yeah, no, I mean, have someone to do everything. Those are the elite guys. I mean, because you're bringing up a guy who's a great NFL player, so yeah, so that's why I think it's good you bring that up, because I think what we have Boykin, who played this season, who is great against the run, piles up the TFLs, is decent in coverage, but Caleb Cost is decent against the run, probably going to be a lot better in coverage, sort of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if Caleb Cost could do all of those things, he's probably a 4 or 5 star kid, and a 4 or 5 star kid in Georgia typically stays in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the baseball aspect of it, and I love some baseball, and who knows how that draft worked, but the money in baseball has gotten ridiculous.
Yeah,
and so hopefully for him, he'll have to make a decision on whether to go to college or take some money and run, and we'll find that out. The North Carolina baseball team has had issues with signees going to the league and not making it to campus. We'll see if Caleb Cost is one of those, but expect him in North Carolina. Like I said, best name in the recruiting class thus far. Don, I'm going to break in a couple questions for you as we wait.
We have a signee.
We have another one. Let's see, why would you put that back behind my head, man? We got all this space up here. I can't see that one. Nolan.
Tommy is complaining about having 3 TVs to look at.
No,
just everyone knows.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we got 11 screens in this room if you count phones, folks. This is the epitome of excess here. Trying to find your notes. break it down. Nolan McConnell for the North Carolina fan base as I update our, whatever you call that, our stream at the bottom.
Okay. So he's the third offensive lineman to commit to North Carolina. Well, the third. There's three commits. Two of them have already put their letters in. He's the third one to come in. All three will enroll early. This is a kid who I think he was projected. He I don't want to say he didn't like the process. He took a no nonsense approach to the recruiting process. Wanted to get it over with. You can kind of see it in his actions. I think early on he was on a fast track to commit to UVA. North Carolina came in with an offer and completely just changed his recruitment. And it wasn't long after that he committed to the Tar Heels. He didn't even take his officials until he didn't take his UNC official until December. Didn't take any other official visits. This is a kid who's a big kid. He's athletic, toolsy kid. I know we threw that term around a lot. Plays defense, defensive line, offensive line. Needs a lot of development. Mostly used as a run blocker, but has the length, has the size, has the foot quickness to develop into an offensive tackle. If he excels in those aspects throughout his development, he could be a blindside protector sort of guy. So he's another one, very high ceiling. It's just a matter of whether his tools can be molded into an elite player.
A couple questions based on that. Colonial Forge High School, what kind of level of competition is that, since we've talked about that in Stafford, Virginia? And also Jack Bicknell, his primary recruiter, of course, now the offensive line coach at Wisconsin. Sort of take us through those two aspects of this.
Can you repeat the questions?
You are a teenager looking at your phone when grown-ups talking. Colonial Forge High School in Stafford, Virginia. Level of competition.
Solid. It's not bad at all. I mean, that's right outside of the DC area, basically, and so there are some good talent up in that area.
And then Jack Bicknell, we talked about this off air a little bit and a little bit on, but he's your primary recruiter, and now he's not there. Clearly, offensive line coach is going to be most of the offensive lineman's primary guy. Not always, but Bicknell's moved on. How did that affect this recruitment? Obviously, it did not, because he sent a letter of intent. But your thoughts there, committing to a guy and then not actually having a chance to play for a guy.
Not only was Jack Bicknell his primary recruiter, but he was Nolan was Jack Bicknell's first offer as a UNC coach. I don't think it obviously didn't matter. I think that this was like I said, a no nonsense kid, valued education, valued location. If you look at the schools he visited, all of them were within a reasonable driving distance, like the campus. He made a ton of visits after he had, actually made a ton of visits beforehand. Before he even got the offer, I think he visited North Carolina twice. He gets the offer, visits North Carolina once with his mom, once with his dad, then ends up committing, then ended up making it to a bunch of practices, made it to a bunch of games. This was a kid who loved the Chapel Hill area, loved the education, and that mattered more to him than his relationship with Jack Bicknell. I'm sure he didn't like seeing Bicknell leave, but that clearly didn't impact him.
So I'm going to bust out a question. I told you got anything, Greg, on that subject before I bring a question in, before we get another commit?
Just let me say one thing. I did the math, so I wanted to share this when we got to the next offensive lineman commit. But we're talking about not many offensive linemen playing for Carolina this past season. The starters played, according to Pro Football Focus, 4,691 snaps, which is 94% of the available snaps for North Carolina in 13 games. The other reserves, and I think Jonathan Adorno had the most, around 200, played 299 snaps. So I think that is something that will be interesting to see how Clements handles rotations. I mean, Bicknell told us last spring that ideally he would be able to play 8 guys. And I think that's what most offensive linemen want, offensive line coaches want. You play 3 tackles, you play 3 guards and 2 centers, and that's ideal. That did not happen this year, even though there are supposedly some talented guys in the backup roles. And with North Carolina, regardless of what some of the seniors who potentially can come back do, uh, if they do come back, they're going to be gone next year anyway. So I think it's really important for some of these younger guys to see more time next year because there's going to be a lot of holes to fill in 2024.
That's a great point about that. And those guys played and stayed relatively healthy all year. And those backup snaps came from when guys were dinged up or whatever. And of course, North Carolina last year had trouble keeping the center healthy and all that. And then Corey Gaynor was able to play. Gosh, he probably played every available snap, didn't he?
Yeah,
Can you look at
I
that?
did a
Except for 20 snaps, and
when
that's just
I
incredible.
knew that the stars played a bunch. I did this to kind of get an idea of who played, who didn't play, sort of layout of the numbers in a weekly scoop. I think it was like just before the NC State game, and I was floored by just how much these stars played. And I just feel like it's I get it that the games were close. I don't know. I just feel like there had to be some more opportunities to get Zach Rice into some games, especially with. Let me just ask you guys, and maybe this is a terrible question to ask, but who was the worst offensive line starter?
Spencer Rowland.
Okay,
Uh,
what
but-
position could Zach Rice have slid into just to see, what we maybe have?
that position. But what got me, and you guys have the numbers, is that Jason Staples pushed back on that the other
Really?
day and said that Spencer Rowland was graded out. And Greg, you could probably call it up right there. Graded out is basically a P5 starter at that position. We're on the big screen now.
Well, he wasn't quite at that grade. He graded out at 66.2, which is okay. And compared to, I think what Jason was getting at was compared to his teammates, his numbers weren't that bad. But Carolina's offensive linemen on the whole did not grade out as successfully as maybe you would like. And that's kind of been a case under the Longo years of, and some of it's the zone blocking scheme, but the running backs are the ones that have gotten a lot of the praise from PFF, and that makes offensive line grading problematic anyway. But yeah, Spencer certainly had some difficult games against good defensive ends, especially late in the year. But in terms of Zach Rice, PFF's got him having played 2 games, 16 snaps.
Yeah.
He played 10 against Florida A&M and then 6 snaps in the final 12 games of the year. So that's 2 games there that you haven't used him in. Maybe, hopefully he'll get some reps in the bowl game. But I'm kind of with Don of like, if this is the guy that you expect to be, I get him not being a key rotation guy this year as a true freshman, but you want to get him some snaps so that he can really have some experience and understand the speed of the game going into the off season. That just did not occur. That's also another gripe of mine, Tommy. Florida A&M being week 0. I get it. You have a young guy quarterback that you want to get him an easy win out of the gate. But by not having an FCS opponent later in the season, even if it's 2 weeks later, you really miss out on the opportunity to get a lot of young guys a ton of snaps. And because they had so many close games throughout the year, there wasn't an opportunity late in the year to say, okay, we're going to take a breather. This is going to be an easy win. Therefore, we can play a lot of young guys. That just did not happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think they approached it. They had a FCS game there, the 11th game of the season with Georgia Tech coming in, and they found out really quick that wasn't. I think with Montelus moving on, I think Zach Rice will certainly have an opportunity to get some snaps in there. I asked Randy Clements, or somebody at the press conference asked Randy Clements, I wrote it up, what's your philosophy on playing more than 5 offensive linemen in a game? And this is from the article on Inside Carolina. Everybody can read it. Play the best 5 at a time. If one of your 5's dog tired and you have a backup that's better when he's fresh, play him. The offensive line guys should be the best 5, have the best 5 on the field. So I don't know if the prospect's going to change a whole lot. We have a guest.
We have a guest. Oh,
as I bring him in.
okay. So how are we going to do this?
So
We do have a letter in, but
we
we
have
can.
a letter. Let's go ahead and get Mr. Don in.
Okay. You want both of us, or okay? Greg does not like. He does not like guests.
I love guests.
Doesn't seem like it, Greg.
What's going on, Mr. Brian Dome? Tommy Ashley here. Don Callahan's over there. I think we both can hear you.
Yeah, I can. I think.
Well, yeah. Good morning, guys. Well, for now, it feels like it's afternoon already, but good morning.
Yeah.
Well, when we have to get to Don's house at 6:30 in the morning and the roosters are still crowing and it's pitch dark outside, it does feel like it's afternoon already. I appreciate you taking a chance or taking the time to join us. I know it's a busy time. We're here on Inside Carolina's live YouTube stream talking about North Carolina's recruiting class. Let me ask you just a holistic question, looking at it from your perspective. How has Mack Brown done here on December 21st, both relatively to the national scale and relative to Mack Brown's past at North Carolina?
Well, I don't think it's lived up to what he's been in the past. More schools coming in to recruit the state of North Carolina. If you look at just the last few years and what he did in state with the top players, North Carolina was pulling in, more of the top players. But sometimes there's going to be evening out. There's a lot of talk going into the season about what was Carolina going to be. Have they maximized their talent? And look, they made it to the ACC championship game, so they had a successful season from that standpoint. The defense got better as the season went on, and that's stuff that you can all sell in recruiting. But the issue is with recruiting, by the time the season starts, 90% of your class is usually done, maybe 85% in the case of Carolina. And so what they did this season should show more in the 24 class. But, I don't think it's up to what Mack Brown did the first few years. But that's not to say it's a bad class. It has some depth. It has talent in it. It's just not to the standard that it was maybe the last few. And part of that to me is, they did a great job in Virginia in the last few classes. And I don't feel like there was that high-end talent in Virginia, the kind of depth that there were in some other classes, especially when you look at last year. I heard you guys talking a little bit about Zach Rice. There were some really good players coming out of there. And while there's still, a lot of talent there, maybe not the top echelon, and maybe North Carolina, where they had some ins, whether it was Dre Bly in the 757 and extending over to Richmond, maybe that's the depth isn't there, and so it was a little harder for them.
I want to ask you about a specific player, and we've had this conversation before a lot. You're probably tired of hearing the name Chris Culliver.
Don, how could I be tired of your voice? Let's be honest.
Those don't know. Brian and I talk almost every day, but I'm a huge Chris Culliver guy, and in my preparation for today, I'm just floored. I mean, his stats are just off the charts. I know he doesn't play against the greatest competition, but his stats are just insane. You can't ask for them to be any better than what they were. He's an unbelievable basketball player. Also, he's a track kid. He has legit size. I know that you're not the only, decision maker when it comes to the rankings. And I don't want to call out 24/7 Sports because I love 24/7 Sports, but they actually have him ranked lower than every other entity out there. What's the beef with Chris Culliver? I mean, could he potentially get any sort of bump before the February signing period?
Yeah, a lot of the discussion will go into February, in January. Once we got through this past cycle, we updated some things maybe about a week ago. I was down. I got to see him at Shrine Ball practice. I was really impressed. Now, the rankings, look, we know they're subjective. If we got every one of them right, that just doesn't happen. And neither does any other site get every one of them right. And so it's different things that you're looking for. Look, I like the way he got out of breaks. I like the way he adjusted to passes. He seemed like a natural pass catcher. Like you mentioned, he's got the multi-sport background, and that's another thing we look at. Now, he's not the biggest guy, and I think that's one of the things he's got a lot of work to do throughout his frame. But he's definitely a guy that we're going to revisit in January now, especially with me seeing him down at Shrine Bowl practice and being able to go back and say, okay, we do it as a committee, we speak about it as a committee, but having a live eval will really help in the process. And like I said, I mean, just because we have them lower doesn't mean we're wrong. Just because others have them higher doesn't mean they're right. You're trying to just, you do the best you can um, through it with each individual prospect. And listen, there's going to be guys that we have high that the other three entities have lower that we'll miss on or they'll miss on. But I understand why it becomes something that Inside Carolina is interested in, because he's committed to Inside Carolina. Don, you and I have spoke about him a lot, just in terms of his ability, his stats. And listen, the stats are great. You like to see that. To me, if you are a big time player and going to play Power 5 football, and especially at North Carolina, they're one of the better teams in the ACC. Well, you should have really good stats. I mean, that's why North Carolina is recruiting you, whether you're in 87 or 93. So that's just something that, yeah, if he didn't have gaudy stats, that would be concerning.
Yeah, yeah.
We're talking with Brian Doan, 24/7 Sports. It's been a long morning already. I apologize. I should know
Well,
that.
and plus you're with Don, so it makes it twice as long.
Yeah, at least. Well, I don't know. I kind of like Don sometimes, but
see,
it's been a
Ryan,
long
I
couple
get
of
this
days.
bad rap.
I will give you that he is an interesting fella. A lot of people in the chat. One thing that Inside Carolina folks will do, they will pipe up when they believe one of their guys is underrated, and so you've explained Culliver there pretty well for folks. And we've had debates over the years about guys that were rated maybe too high or too low, and it all seems to come out in the wash ultimately. But let me ask you sort of another big picture question. Looking at this class, Don clearly loves Chris Culliver. But when we're talking about the class, where else can North Carolina? They filled some needs clearly, but who else in this class do you believe can provide Carolina some maybe not immediate help, but some significant help sooner than later when you address all of them?
Yeah, and to me, listen, man, you better be special to provide significant help as a true freshman. And that doesn't matter if you're a running back, a DB. I think the hardest part to do it is on the line of scrimmage, just because, especially in this era of some super seniors where you're going to have 18 and 19-year-old kids going into North Carolina playing against 23 and 24-year-olds. And that's a big difference. But for me, listen, the two guys I love are the two guys at the top of the class for me is Jabron Harvey and Tyler Thompson. I think when you're talking about how do you make a difference, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, I know Drake May is still with North Carolina, and you guys know better than me. I'm sure there's more programs that are coming into his DMs and all that stuff. But I joke.
Talk about that.
Well, I mean, listen.
Don't
He's
get me in trouble.
Don, you and I have talked about it. He's a Carolina kid through and through, from a Carolina family. So I think a lot of that stuff about whether he was leaving was much ado about nothing. But for me, I want to see, you have the quarterback situation set for next year. So now you got to find somebody who can help on the defensive side. And, I look at Jabron Harvey, and in September, maybe he's not going to be as big as a player, but maybe by the time October comes and he gets the reps and, gets through practice and gets his feet wet, maybe he's a guy that can go get the quarterback come October, November. And Tyler Thompson is just another kid I absolutely love. I mean, I love his athleticism, his size, his speed off the edge, his closing speed, change direction. You can drop him into coverage. You can do a lot of things with him as well. And so when I look at it, your two top-rated players in the class are guys that are at a premium position. And for me, that's really important. And I'll tell you what, man, and I told Don this, and I remember when he was committed to Vanderbilt, I watched Julian Randolph's tape, and I just thought he was a really good tight end prospect who could go get the ball. I think he has a mentality to block. It's going to take him a little while just in terms of learning the route concepts, what they want him to do on the offensive side, being able to block college kids. But I'm telling you, man, the tight end position gets overlooked a lot until and you don't really notice it a ton until you have a really good one. And I think Julian Randolph has a chance to be a really good tight end. I just think that he brings so much to the table in terms of athleticism, ball catching skills, intelligence. He's just got to get stronger, like they all do. But those are three guys off the top of my head that I really like.
So we reached into the chat to get some questions, and so this is a kid. I love the kid, definitely as a kid, but also he has tons of talent. He could be frustrating at times sometimes when you watch him long enough. Tad Hudson, what's your thoughts and how? For me, I'm just talking about for me. Evaluating him, ranking him, has always
Very
been
difficult.
Yes, because of just the inconsistency. Can you kind of speak to just what you've kind of dealt with evaluating him and just your thoughts on Tad Hudson in general?
Yeah, I think, the first time I saw Tad was, I think, coming out of his sophomore season or maybe during his sophomore season when there was COVID and he was just kind of at a camp. I thought he threw a really beautiful ball. He had really good touch on some things. The arm strength was good, and you knew it would get better as his career progressed and he got more mature. But it's what you just said, Don. It's the inconsistency. Some of it was the accuracy. They did not ask him to throw the ball down the field a ton this season, especially from the film I watched. And so, that's a battle in terms of, I remember when Caleb Williams, who just won the Heisman, and we were going through his ranking, and the knock on him was his completion percentage was in the low 50s. And how can you be an elite quarterback with a completion percentage in the low 50s? But when you broke down his film, you saw that receivers weren't getting open. He was under duress every play. And you wondered what he would be like when he got some time, when he had receivers to throw to. And obviously we see what happened with college, and going to play for Lincoln Riley as a quarterback probably helps a smidge too. So with Tad Hudson, I think, a lot of short stuff, a lot of quick reads. And so it made it a little more difficult. Now I'll say it. I've been higher on Tad Hudson than a lot of guys on the committee. With that said, I'm still comfortable with where he is ranked. I just feel like there's more in there than what he has shown. And I keep going back to watching him and how pretty of a ball he threw, watching him live, and the arm strength was there. And I just feel like there's something about him that has some kind of winning formula in him. And I think and those are all things that are really hard to put into numbers and then say, okay, how does this translate into a ranking? And so I think he has some of those intangibles that unless you follow him, know him, talk to him, you may not appreciate. I know I appreciate it, and he's a quarterback I like a lot.
Interesting take there. Tad Hudson, of course, North Carolina's lone quarterback commit for the 2023 class. Don Callahan, anything more for the professional Brian Doan?
I just appreciate Brian's time as always, especially this is like all of us, one of the busier days. So he made some time for the Inside Carolina subscribers. So I appreciate him doing that for us today.
Yeah, Brian, we appreciate you taking time. Hopefully you and Don Callahan can get a little bit of rest at the end of this day.
We're going to vacation together.
Hey, I will say this. Listen, I know there's always questions about rankings, and that's great because it shows they care. It holds us accountable in a good way, in a bad, whatever, and so I always welcome that stuff. And listen, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. And what I like about Inside Carolina is if you explain where you're coming from, they may not agree, but they understand it. And so I always enjoy coming on on the Inside Carolina site and with you guys. No matter what a hard time I give Don, he's a hard worker and a good dude. So just don't tape that part of it.
He certainly
We'll
loves
take
the
that.
attention.
We're going to take that part out of the
Of the
re-air.
live feed.
Well, we do appreciate you taking the time,
Right.
and we'll talk again soon. That's Brian Doan, 24/7 Sports, Don's supervisor.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Brian.
Thank you, guys.
All right, what a great guest. I mean, I'm battling bots in the chat, trying to talk
Is there
to.
bots?
There are always bots. It just takes the time.
Yeah. So this live, I guess, podcast, whatever, is something that that there's some edgy comments towards me in this chat.
I mean, I think your buddies on there
Yeah.
talking about the professed love for Chris Culliver. Look, we've got a couple other letters have dropped in when we
Yeah.
were talking, and let's get right to it.
We got two, I think, right?
Yep, we got Christian Hamilton. Let me find his in Hickory Ridge High School, another wide receiver. I was going to ask Don about him, but how does he compare to Chris Culliver? I mean, let's
So
do
he's
it that way.
so if we're just kind of laying it out and like setting our offense, Hamilton is the slot guy and Culliver is the outside guy. Obviously that's simplistic, but I think what what Hamilton brings is he's an edgy guy. You know, he actually very, very competitive. His numbers dropped his senior season. I think a lot of that was he was asked to do things that to help the team and not necessarily help his profile. You know, playing some more defense, being more of a blocker, and like I said, that hurt his stock a little bit, hurt his stats. But I think long term, that's what you want to see out of a kid. Yeah, he's a kid. Another UNC alum as a coach. I did not cover Jupiter Wilson coming out of high school, but obviously that only helps. Although he would have been happy if Culliver would, if Hamilton would have went to Clemson. But obviously, I know Jupiter was happy to see one of his pupils sign with UNC.
So Joel Starlings dropped in, defensive lineman out of Benedictine in Richmond. I love Don's descriptors.
Oh boy,
when he's talking, I'm going to read this word for word because I find this is Starlings is a deceptively athletic, run-plugging defensive tackle, strong at the point of attack, will make plays while taking on blockers. This seems like something North Carolina could certainly use. Sort of describe here's my favorite thing is the level of competition, and also how it projects forward for North Carolina and his lead recruiter, Tim Cross.
So first, to address what you brought up about my descriptions, with these, I like to bust out the paintbrushes and get a little artsy with it. I want to paint a picture in your mind. I want you to visualize this recruit when you are reading my description. So hopefully I was able to accomplish that with at least a couple of these descriptions. But yeah, I mean, he's a kid who, so the level of competition, same level of competition as Andre Green, the same exact private school league in Virginia. It's an interesting league because there are definitely high level players that come out of this league, but I don't think you're always playing against those high level guys. George Pettaway also came out of this league too. So definitely some players, but I think a lot of these teams have one or two really, really, really good players, Power 5 players, and then the rest are cans. So
tomato cans, trash
cans. But yeah, so you're not necessarily going up against, when Benedictine played against I probably shouldn't use the term cans, it's going to get me in trouble. But when Benedictine played against St. Christopher 2 years ago, it wasn't like Andre Green was going up against Joel Starlings, but they definitely obviously shared the football field, and there's definitely was some talent on that football field at that time.
I mean, it's all relative when you're looking at high school guys anyway. You're looking at motor, you're looking at love of the game and all that. And you know, you got to dominate in high school to be really successful on the college level. Couple questions while we wait for the next thing, and I want folks in the chat to put where you're from. So let's see who's the furthest away. I saw somebody say they're in southern Utah, so that's pretty cool watching us live. Shout out to the 475 plus people in the live YouTube stream. Jordan Louis, Brian Green will commit, I guess, at 10 o'clock coming up shortly. We will be here. I have a feeling we will be here for a while. Greg Barnes, Don Callahan there again, Inside Carolina's signing day special. I had a question. I can't find it. Oh, yes. I am going to ask the question that I wanted to ask a long time ago.
Uh-oh.
And this is your homework, Don.
Oh, boy.
I'm not going to do the name because I'm not sure I like the name. And it's a question from early this morning. If there's some downtime,
Okay.
I'd love for Don to break down each IC staff member as if they were a recruit. What position would they play? What value would they bring to the program? So you have that as your homework.
Okay.
You can do it.
Oh, man. This is so. Am I projecting for a football team?
How do you don't you cover football
Ooh.
recruiting? So I mean,
You know, we have some sensitive people that we work with. You know,
I do not disagree with that statement. So I'll take you off the hook. We have a letter of intent
okay.
that has come in. Michael Short.
Yes, we talked about him a little bit earlier with Kennedy Tinsley as coach.
Kennedy Tinsley, of course, of North Carolina Tar Heel, Mallard Creek High School, probably the most dominant or one of the most dominant high schools here in North Carolina. Michael Short, a late ad, a relatively late ad, sort of what he brings. I want to say, is he a squatty Mike linebacker?
No. You could read the description. It's out there.
I'm aware, but I want you to tell our people because they don't get this inside stuff. It's inside Carolina, but this is inside Carolina.
Yeah, well, I hate to break it to you, but that's the stuff that is going to
stuff on the side.
Well, as they're coming out.
Oh, so this is dropping.
Yeah, this is dropping.
Spoil it. Long, versatile linebacker. Short was productive. This is one of those things I will ask you. Tell me about that level of competition and how he projects. And give me a player comp. I'm gonna put you on.
So this is going to be easy. The player comp. Ced Gray, Charlotte kid, both were long, versatile linebackers coming out of high school. The main difference between the two was that Ced played at Audrey Kell High School, Charlotte School, but not as deep of a roster compared to Myers Park, Mallard Creek, Huff High School. They definitely produce players. They've sent a lot of players onto the Power 5 level. But because of the lack of depth on their roster, they don't have the luxury of just kind of having their guys focus on one specific position and that's it. And so a guy like Cedric, who was by far the best football player for a couple of seasons, they played him at wide receiver because that's what they needed. They needed the offensive production from him. He did play a little bit of defense, particularly during his senior season, because they had a coaching change and the former defensive coordinator became the head coach. And naturally, he wanted to get his best player on defense a little bit more. But with Michael Short, competition-wise, you don't get much better than the Charlotte area with who you're playing against, especially at Mallard Creek, where they actually venture out of North Carolina. They usually play a top South Carolina school every year. I think they may even play I'd have to look at their schedule, but I think they may even play a Georgia powerhouse also. So the competition certainly there, and he put up big numbers. I think it was 121 tackles he had on the season. He's a kid who, and we talked about this earlier with Kennedy Tinsley, who shows some promise. I mean, he landed 30 scholarship offers coming out of his junior season. All of them were group of 5 or under, and then he broke out his senior season, picked up an offer from Missouri, North Carolina, Wake Forest, and that obviously altered his recruitment. He ended up signing with North Carolina, committing a week ago. I think Greg has a question. You don't have the mic.
Can y'all read that? So I asked people to put in where they're from. Victor Little, I need photographic proof that you are in south of Lake Como in north of
that
Milan,
is cool, though.
Italy, because that might have set the record because that's literally on the other side of the world.
Yeah, Victor, how could we get evidence from Victor?
send me a picture at tommy@insidecarolina.com. my
Not
email
of your
address.
body.
No. I want scenery, and I want proof of life. So I need a newspaper
Proof of life.
with a date on it or something.
Yeah, if someone told me right now to go get a newspaper, it would probably take me 5 hours.
It'd take you longer than that. They don't have them anywhere anymore. You can't get them at gas stations. So I think, Victor, you just need to reach out to us, and maybe we can host this at your place next year.
Uncle Buck's gonna pay to fly us out to Italy.
Don, you mentioned that we spoke with Kennedy Tinsley earlier. For those who have joined recently, that interview took place at 8:30, and it really is a good listen. One thing I wanted to ask you about Kennedy, with him coaching Michael, and didn't get around to it, is, well, let me say this first. There's a lot of former college football players who are coaching at high schools across the country, and the large majority of them are in it for the kids. And while they do have a rooting interest in their team, they're most focused on doing what's best for their players. So they want to put them in a good situation, wherever that may be. So I think we need to establish that line first. From that, though, how beneficial and what impact does having somebody like Kennedy Tinsley, who is a recent Carolina graduate, played for the program, to have him in state at a powerhouse program, just in terms of kind of the dynamics with the staff and kind of spreading the word about what the North Carolina program is about and what it's been about over the years?
So, well, first, Buck is in the chat, responding. Did he? Yeah. Maybe if we do a good enough job this last hour, maybe he'll change his mind. So I think, and I was trying to look it up real quick, but I'm not going to find it, and it's not great radio for me to just sit there and look up. But I asked Michael that specifically when he received the North Carolina offer, and he said something to the effect of, Kennedy's not pushing him in any direction, but it does, looking at Kennedy, seeing what he's become. He's basically an example of what happens if you go to North Carolina. He has a good job. He's a good man, good family guy. I think he has 3 daughters and 1 son. Had to try 4 times to get that son in there. I can't imagine. I have 1 daughter. I can't imagine 3. Yeah, so I think just having that example around, because Kennedy's not like obviously he brings his kids to North Carolina for the camps and everything. I think he brought them up there. He brought them up for the 707. He also brought them up there for one of the one-day camps. He's not a big rah-rah UNC guy, but it's clear that he went to UNC. And I think just the example that he exhibits makes that impact. Same thing with Jupiter. He's not a big rah-rah UNC guy at all. But, he went to North Carolina, and just seeing what he has become, that speaks more than someone pushing you to a school. And I think some of these kids, I have never had this happen or never witnessed this or aware of it. But I think in a lot of these situations, these are high school kids. You guys know, if you push them some direction, they're going the other way as fast as possible. So I think almost that some of that stuff kind of works against it. So I think it kind of helps North Carolina that these guys aren't pushing their kids to UNC.
It's a fine line, and we've seen how it works. Shout out to Victor responding in the chat. We look forward to it. Shout out to Buck Sanders for Breakfast with Don from the Man Tower. Buck Sanders joining us in the chat. Question, Don, in the chat. And look, when we first started doing this, we anticipated 7 to 10 with some extra coverage. The Jordan Louis commitment.
Jordan Louis.
So,
and we also have a new letter in.
So while I'm getting that set up, real quick, Evan Kirk asked you to preview the Louis commitment coming up. So just briefly, can you tell us what to expect here in the next few minutes?
So he's supposed to be announcing it on his Instagram page. I will pull that up as soon as I get a chance, and I can give that to you guys. But he's down to North Carolina, West Virginia, and Vanderbilt. He was committed to West Virginia. Actually, another former UNC player / coach, Chad Scott, for his commitment to West Virginia. He's another kid whose senior season did really well, drew the attention of Clemson, Florida State, Georgia, and obviously North Carolina. Of the four, only North Carolina ended up offering him, and that put North Carolina in a great spot to land the commitment today. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition.
So as we wait for that announcement, Don Callahan's going to be the happiest man in the room.
Oh boy.
Chris Culliver's letter has arrived in the North Carolina football offices. Maiden High School wide receiver. What more can you say about this young man that you have not already said? I mean, you put Brian Doan on the spot about the rankings, but the bottom line is North Carolina's receivers have had some success. They've had some great quarterbacks over the last 3 years, 4 years, and now Chris Culliver comes in and adds to that room.
Yeah, so I think the thing with him is he's just a raw talent, and I do think that there's different levels to high school production, and his high school production it's mind blowing looking at his numbers. You know, I mean he wasn't that far away from having 2,000 receiving yards in 14 games. He barely played any defense and had 5 interceptions. He returned just 1 kick return, 87 yards for a touchdown. Odds are teams saw that and were like, we're staying away from him. If you talk to high school coaches in the area, they constantly game plan for him. I promise you, no one was kicking to him on purpose at all. You know, I just feel like when I talk to the rankings committee guys, Brian's only one of them. Brian only has a certain amount of voting power with this stuff, especially with some of the restructuring that's going on. But, you know, they preach about being multi-sport kid. That's what he is. He excels. Go throw on his basketball clips. They're unbelievable. He has great track times. I think it's 11. It's in the very, very low 11s in the 100. He has legit size. You see the kid in person, he's a legit 6'3". You know, typically when you see a kid on paper listed at 6'3", you see them, they're like 6'1". He's a legit 6'3". Probably should be putting out there that he's 6'5". He could pass for that sometimes. You know, plays well at the Shrine Bowl. You know, had 2 big catches there. I mean, I can just go on and on and on about this kid. But I think that he has all the talent, all the potential in the world to be a great player for North Carolina.
He is in the book, letter of intent in for Chris Culliver. Still waiting on a few letters to come in. Jordan Louis set to commit on, you got his Instagram up?
I'm trying. I was trying to find it while he's talking. So here I got it. Yeah. I'm going to put it. Should I put it in the chat for people?
Certainly can.
And while we're waiting on Louis' announcement, Victor Little is in Italy. Said he's on military. He's on duty military wise. So just
we'll never be able to get to broadcast from there.
For sure not, but want to say thank you for your service. It is December 21st. There's a lot of servicemen and women around the country who are away from their homes on Christmas. And so I think it's important for all of us to say thank you and to appreciate those efforts. It means a lot to all of us.
Yeah, pushing up. Well, actually, 10:04. So we are in extra time. If you're a soccer fan, we are in overtime. If you're a football fan,
and go look at some of the videos. They're doing all the Argentina celebrations today. Lionel Messi could not get into his own house because the road was just full of people.
It is incredible. I'm not a huge soccer fan, but I watched that. I watched the World Cup religiously when it was on. That was the greatest championship game I've ever seen in any sport, in my opinion. How that went down.
I did not watch it because it's Sunday, and I was just.
So you watched the Vikings and the Ravens.
I did not know. So I put on the Vikings game. That was Saturday. I put on the Vikings and Colts game and turned it off when it was 33-0, and then got the alert that the Vikings won in overtime. I was like, "What the hell happened?"
Don, my kid is a big fantasy football guy, and so he's got Kirk Cousins and Jefferson from Minnesota. So that's the only reason he was watching the game, and so he was going nuts about that. This is your favorite question, so I have to be sure to ask it. Comparisons for Culliver.
Man, that's a tough one.
Player comp.
Yeah. Some of these are easier than others. I really struggle to think of someone Oh man. Yeah, it's really tough for me. I don't like this comp, but it's the one I think about. Maybe De'Ami Brown. I don't like it too much. So don't like. That's the first one that kind of pops in my mind. One of my problems with player comps is I have like the worst memory ever. So like anything beyond the last couple of years, I barely remember. But I do have Jordan Louis' announcement on. I put the link to it in the chat. So he's actually speaking right now. Do we want to continue to talk and see what? So he has a UNC hat, a Georgia Tech hat, and a West Virginia hat on the table. And he's talking.
So we're going to play by play, or they can watch.
I don't know.
455 people in the YouTube chat. 3 hours and 6 minutes in, waiting for Jordan Louis to announce his commitment.
How much longer after this do we want to go?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. We can talk about it with our 500
with
friends.
our family.
Well, yeah,
They're our family today.
The plan was to get out of here at 10 o'clock. Obviously, we want to see what Louis does.
All right, he's standing up.
All right, let's see Don's play-by-play skills, folks.
He grabs something that's not a hat, looks at it, he throws it to the side. I'm not sure what that was. He grabbed, I guess it's a shirt. Or no, it's gloves. So he tossed the gloves. He's standing up. So grabs the.
This is made for TV, folks.
Georgia Tech. I didn't think Georgia Tech was one of the. He puts a Georgia Tech hat on and puts it down.
Greg, what do you think about Don's play-by-play skills?
Grabs the West Virginia hat, puts it down nicely. And he's taking off his hoodie. He has a West Virginia shirt on.
Mom hadn't taken her hoodie off
Yeah,
yet.
that's what you got. We got to watch for the parents. Although Chris Culver didn't have his parents in on his. Christian Hamilton. That was funny.
So we've got.
And then he's taking the West Virginia shirt off, and it looked like there was a blue. Nope, it was white. I thought it was maybe Carolina blue. Grabs a UNC hat.
Come on, Don. I need more flowery stuff.
No, he took the UNC hat down. So he's going. Oh, he's reaching for something. This is like the longest sort of like switcheroo we've seen.
Did you not tell him that we had it?
Oh, he's putting on a UNC shirt. And someone threw him a UNC hat. He's putting it on. And he just committed to North Carolina.
Just committed to the University of North Carolina. So let's talk about Jordan Louis. I've got him up on the screen already. Look at there. I was prepared.
It's first time for everything.
Running back room at North Carolina is stacked.
Yes.
May look a little different after the portal windows open and close, and there's another one after spring practice. But where does Louis fit? What does he bring to the North Carolina team? You know, what does he do differently that maybe one of the 6 guys in front of him at the moment don't do, or just give me some feedback?
Yeah. So I got to say that, they flirted with the idea of taking a running back in the spring, specifically Jordan Louis. So this is not a kid that just kind of fell on their lap. There's a kid that they knew about and liked a lot. But I still was surprised they took a running back in this class just because of the depth and how young that depth is. And I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like anybody's looking to get out. I mean, maybe after the bowl game we see some departures, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case right now. As far as what he brings, he probably brings a little bit more, a better balance, I guess, between the power and the elusiveness. I mean, you got 6 guys in that room. I mean, so there's everything there imaginable. So I don't know if he brings a whole lot that's different that what isn't already in there. I just think he fits exactly what North Carolina has had success with as far as being a balanced running back.
It is a massive room considering they typically only play one guy.
Yeah.
This is a statement I had, Tommy.
Okay, I thought it was a question following.
Well, I mean, clearly a lot of Elijah Green got some time. He was
Yeah.
down on the depth chart, allegedly at the bottom of the depth chart coming into the season, was hurt. Ended up being, he looked really good at times late in the season. DJ Jones is a guy that, he's the old head in the room. You got Hampton, you got Petaway, you got Caleb Hood. I think when you have Caleb Hood, great kid, great player, you got to be available. And he certainly struggled on the injury front. So I'm not sure how much you can count on him, but it was surprising to me. Is there somebody else in?
It was Jordan Louis, so we don't really need to change paths at all.
So
so his letter's in.
So his letter's in, so I can update it from committed to the letter is in. But yeah, it's credit to a guy that wants to jump in a room like that. And like I said, we'll see what it looks like when it all shakes out. But here we are at 10-11 on December 21st, and they've got a running back recruit that I think you would agree, Don, that a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, wasn't even a thought.
Yeah.
To get into that room.
Well, running back definitely wasn't a need, but clearly he was a guy that Larry Porter really, really liked. And so, yeah, I don't know how much more we can say about it.
I just find it strange.
Yeah.
You got projected right now to have 7 guys on scholarship in the running back room, and projected right now to have 10 guys in the wide receiver room on scholarship.
Yeah. So the assumption, the staff has got to feel like, I would assume, that some of these running backs are going to leave, right? That's the only thing I think of. Is 7 is a ton,
right? And
because you can get by easily with 4.
Correct. And just so people know, the transfer portal this time is open for 45 days. So I believe that takes us through January 18th.
Yeah.
And then there's also a 15-day period after spring practice, which is May 1st to May 15th. So there's still plenty of time for those kinds of decisions to be made. Not that we're suggesting anybody needs to leave, but just in terms of scholarship count, that was an interesting take with Louis, although you obviously wouldn't take him unless you really liked him.
So. Yeah, absolutely. So how much longer? Let's see.
We probably need to be done by 10:30 so we can.
Okay.
So
right.
Obviously a lot more news to come in, a few more letters to come in. We're probably going to get out of here no later than 10:30. Shout out to everybody that's been in here for hours on end. Just as
why don't we in the chat put in if you've been in here since 7 a.m.
I think most people have, or close to it. But what we're going to do, just for planning purposes for you guys that are in here or maybe got here late, is we're going to put this in the podcast feed. Made to be relevant for a while. It's going to be the longest podcast ever. Maybe you do it time and a half or even 2 times the speed to cut down on the time. But a lot of good content from Don Callahan, Greg Barnes here. After we finish, Don might not know it, but Greg Barnes and I are going to record a segment for Next Level with Don Callahan to go up. Obviously, Next Level is our YouTube show that Greg and I have done. Greg drives the ship, and I'm a part of it, where we've had more in-depth discussions about all things Carolina sports related, and have had some great guests. Don will be another in a long line of solid guests. So you got to bring it, Don. You got to bring in a little more than you have here on this show for the Next Level. It's a different level, right? It's next level.
The next level.
And then Carolina basketball. Well, Mack Brown at noon. Ross Martin and myself will cover the press conference at noon, where Mack details the signees and usually goes through some film, doesn't he? He breaks down film on them. And then Carolina and Michigan in basketball tonight at 7 o'clock. I'll be back in front of you on the YouTube channel doing with Dewey Burke. A little bit later, though, not immediately after the game, a little bit later to discuss North Carolina and Michigan. What else we got? Who are we still left with, Don? I'll put it out there for you on that.
So we have 16 letters in, which means we're short 4. I'm trying to figure that out in my head. I know Trey Miller is one of them. Now he's in a different time. He's the only guy in a different time zone. So I'm sure that's a factor. Ed Hudson. Okay, that's another good one. Let's see. let's see. Paul Billups, that's 3, and then God, who else? Caleb Lavalley, who's teammates with Aiden Duncanson. So you would think that those two would sign at the same time, but sometimes I guess that's not the case. Did you have something, Greg, that you want to get into?
I do have some pressing content to get
Uh-oh.
into. I feel my inner Ross Martin channeling to the surface here before we get off. How many bow rounds have you had this morning? You've been eating bow rounds for 2 hours, I think.
Well, it takes me a little bit long time to eat a single bow round, so it might seem like more than what
Explain the
really.
process for eating the bow round.
Well, it's different in front of the camera because I don't want the crumbs falling all. And I'm such a sloppy eater. I'm so happy that we can get something too messy. So, I mean, I've had a good amount of bow rounds. I've been trying to share them with Greg. I don't want them to get cold. They're not good cold, and they are starting to get cold now. Greg, I have offered bow rounds to Greg multiple times, and he has declined my advances each time. So part of this is Greg's fault.
We're getting close to lunchtime, so I may grab one on the way out. Don, you've been on the recruiting trail for a long time. 2022 is 10 days away from wrapping up. Do you have a favorite meal from the recruiting trail this year?
Oh man. So I used to actually, this is probably before the pandemic. I used to get recommendations for when I was doing different stops. Ultimately, though, I'm trying to get home as quickly as possible, so I just end up just grabbing fast food on my way home. But I mean, I do. Oh God, I'm not gonna remember any names, but if I do have time, I try to hit up some hole in the wall barbecue places. I think you recommended a place in Gastonia once.
Black's Barbecue.
That's right. So I've been that was very good. Michelle recommended a place, I believe, in Kernersville. That was really good. I like hitting up those sort of places. But I can't think of any names off the top of my head.
Yeah, there's a lot of good barbecue spots along the 85 corridor. Yeah, Bridges is excellent in
Mhm.
Shelby. Chris Lang hangs out there quite a bit. Lexington Barbecue, of course, is a classic. I'm not going to get into the Down East barbecue options. I'm not as familiar, and I know that's rarefied, protected air. That's more Tommy Ashley area, at least Smithfield for sure.
Yeah, we can have that debate later. I'm not a food aficionado though. If it's good, I'll eat it.
Yeah, well,
I don't
that's
care
how I
where
am.
it came from. I try to avoid Bojangles, but I didn't have that opportunity today. Just because the old stomach's not as good
We
as
need
it
to get
once
it.
was.
Like, if anyone's out there that has sponsorship capabilities, we need to get next year some sort of food sponsor.
We need a live audience. We need to move this set up to that window, open the windows, and have a party out there.
That'd be
Kind of like the Pope does, stands above everybody, and you could stand out
maybe
there.
We
and
can
announce
auction off seats.
Always looking to make money. I
That's
just want
right.
to have people. Look, we're gonna get out of.
You got one more. This came in.
Uh-oh. I need my sound. Don Paul Billups
Yes.
is now in the hopper. Another guy that's been committed for a little bit. Break it down for us.
So he not only is from the 757 area, which is where Dre Bly is from. He's actually from Dre Bly's old high school. This is a kid who is being recruited as a wide receiver, but at the high school level, I mean, he's a typical 757 athlete where he played both sides of the ball, and you almost kind of scratch your head wondering which side is better. Good length, good frame, very strong hands, good anticipation. Just one of those backyard players who just plays football. Throw him out there, give him an idea of what he's supposed to do, and he's going to make plays. And that's what he did for Western Branch. They didn't do a good job of keeping track of their stats, but I watched a lot of his highlights, and it just seems like, whether it's at punt returner, kick returner, safety, cornerback, wide receiver, running back, quarterback. I mean, it just seemed like he was just constantly making plays throughout his senior and junior seasons. I mean, he's a player. You're just a raw athlete, and Lonnie Galloway, UNC's wide receivers coach, is going to get the first shot of kind of molding him into wide receiver. But we've seen guys from the 757 area, Daz Newsom's first one that comes to mind, come in as a specific position and then excel at another one. And Paul certainly has that capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, they continue to stack skill players,
Hmm.
and that's what gets the flash, what gets everything. So Paul Billups adds to that, another tall, long guy. Um, Lonnie Galloway's had success,
Yeah.
and we'll see how Drake May's last season at North Carolina goes with those guys, with Josh Downs
You know
out of
what?
there.
If I can interrupt you real
You
quick.
can. It's your house. Only because it's your house.
It's so funny to me that everyone just accepted as fact that this is Drake May's last year. I get it. I understand, what he's done and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know. It's just funny to me that it's just accepted. It's going to be his last year and that's it.
Because I mean, he's going to make a lot of money. He
Yeah.
could have made a lot of money this year, and he's going to make a lot of money at North Carolina. But it's different for basketball and football. I think with football, you've got
But we've seen
limited time.
We've seen more basketball guys go early than football guys.
But now with NIL,
Hmm.
I don't think there's any debate that Armando Bacot, Caleb Love, and those guys would probably not be there,
Yeah.
but for NIL.
Yeah.
But with football, and especially a quarterback, and especially you're talking about a top 5 pick, I would drive him to the draft if I were Mark May.
I get that. I get that. But it's just I don't know. I guess I just think about certain things like Sam Howell before his last season. Everyone was talking first round draft pick, and he drops to what was it, 5th or 6th?
That's why you get out when you can.
Well, yeah.
Now,
So
he had to stay that last year,
but he had another year of eligibility. But anyway, but I mean even coming out of the season, there was still talk about him being one of the top quarterbacks coming off the board. I don't know. I just feel like I think the world of Drake May. If anyone's ever heard me talk about Drake May, I think unbelievable player. Way back in high school, I've always sung his praises. Not to level Chris Culliver, but very close to it. I just know that there are a lot of variables involved in these things that can knock plans off of the tracks, especially when we're projecting over a year out. That's all.
I agree with you. We will say, assuming things continue as they are,
Okay.
with the caveat that life happens, the world happens, and all that. I think it's about time for us to get out of here.
Okay.
We agree. It's been the Inside Carolina Signing Day special. Look, you guys have been great. 400, 500 plus people in here for 3 hours to listen to Don Callahan, Greg Barnes, and myself discuss North Carolina's recruiting class. There's a ton more to talk about. You got some more letters of intent to come in. There's transfer portal guys that have come in. Stick with Inside Carolina and InsideCarolina.com's Tar Pit Premium message board for all of Don Callahan's work, all of the staff's work, Ben Sherman, Ross Martin, everybody piling in on recruiting and signing day. You'll get some text. You'll get some more commitments. We'll be doing more podcasts, but it's done for the day. So many thanks to everybody for joining us. Take care, and everybody be safe, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.